The wind in the Wyoming Territory did not just blow, it scoured. It was a living, breathing malice that stripped the paint from the siding, the moisture from the soil, and the hope from the soul. It came down from the Bighorn Mountains with a low, mournful howl, carrying grit that found its way through the tightest window sashes and into the very lines of a person's face. Maeve Callahan stood by the south pasture fence, the heavy wire cutters weighing down her hand like a judge's gavel. She was 30 years old, but the wind and the sun had conspired to make her look older. Her skin was the color of dried wheat, browned and toughened by exposure, and fine lines bracketed her eyes that were constantly squinting against the glare of the high plains sun. She wore a man's canvas coat that had once belonged to her father, the shoulders broad and stiff, swallowing her sturdy frame. A battered felt hat was pulled low over hair the color of dark roasted coffee, tied back severely with a strip of leather. She gripped the fence post. Shaking it, it wobbled in the dry earth. The rot was setting in at the base. Another thing to fix. Another thing that required money she did not have and strength she was rapidly losing. Damn this wind, she thought, not with anger, but with the dull resignation of a woman who had fought the elements every day for 10 years. Behind her, the homestead stood defiant but weary. The main house, built of timber hauled miles from the breathless slopes of the mountains, leaned slightly to the east, as if turning its back to the prevailing gusts. The barn was in better shape, for in this country, you took care of your beasts before you took care of yourself. But the corrals were empty, save for a few bony heifers and the old plow horse, Buster, whose ribs showed through his winter coat like the rungs of a ladder. Maeve worked the wire, her hands wrapped in thick leather gloves that were worn smooth at the palms. Her knuckles ached. It was November, 1889, and the air already held the metallic tang of coming snow. She was alone. That was the simple, brutal fact of it. Her father, Patrick Callahan, had been in the ground for 6 months, dead of a heart that simply quit beating halfway through digging an irrigation ditch. He had left her the land, the debt, and a clause in the deed that hung over her head like a guillotine blade. The territory law was a tangled mess of old homestead acts and new bureaucratic greed. But the family lawyer in Cheyenne had made it clear. The original claim had been filed under a specific partnership agreement with her uncle back east. Upon Patrick's death, the title would revert to the male line, her cousin Eustace, a soft-handed clerk in Philadelphia who had never seen a cow that wasn't on a dinner plate, unless Maeve could prove the homestead was a family operation. And in the eyes of the law, a solitary woman was not a family. She was a liability. She had 1 year from the date of her father's death to marry and secure the claim. 6 months were gone. Maeve twisted the wire tight, the metal biting into the wood. She wiped sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. She did not want a husband. She had tried that once, 5 years ago, and the memory of it still burned in her gut, hotter than the rot-gut whiskey the men drank at the Silver Dollar Saloon. She finished the fence line as the sun began to dip toward the jagged teeth of the western mountains, painting the sky in bruised purples and blood reds. She walked back toward the house, her boots kicking up puffs of alkali dust. As she neared the porch, she saw a rider silhouetted against the dying light. He sat his horse with the easy arrogance of a man who owned everything he could see. Silas Ward. Maeve stiffened, her hand instinctively drifting toward the heavy wrench hanging from her belt loop, then falling away. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. Silas was a big man, broad through the chest, wearing a coat of fine wool that had no business being out here in the dust. His boots were polished black, free of the mud and manure that coated Maeve's. He owned the Triple Bar Ranch, a sprawling empire that bordered her land on 3 sides. He had been trying to swallow the Callahan homestead for years, like a snake unhinging its jaw for a stubborn egg. Evening. Maeve, Silas called out. His voice was rich, smooth, and utterly devoid of warmth. Mr. Ward, Maeve replied, not breaking her stride until she reached the bottom step of the porch. To what do I owe the pleasure? Silas chuckled, a dry sound like dry leaves skittering over rock. He leaned forward on his saddle horn, leather creaking. "You look tired, girl. This land is too much for a woman alone. I have told you that before. I am managing," Maeve said. "Are you?" Silas swept a gloved hand toward the leaning fence she had just repaired. "The bank tells a different story. And word is that cousin of yours is already inquiring about ticket prices to Cheyenne." Maeve felt a cold stone settle in her stomach, but she kept her chin high. "My business with the bank is private." Silas swung down from his horse. He moved with a heavy grace, walking to the water trough and dipping a ladle. Though he did not drink, he just let the water spill back out, wasting it. "I am here to make you an offer. Maeve, the final one. I am not selling." "Silas, I am not asking to buy the land," he said softly, turning to face her. "I am offering to marry you." Maeve stared at him. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind rattling the dry cornstalks in the garden patch. She looked at his face, the heavy jowls, the eyes that were as flat and hard as agate. There was no affection there. There was only acquisition. He looked at her the same way he looked at a prize heifer at the county fair. "You want the water rights," Maeve said flatly. "That is what this is. You marry me. You get the creek access my father fought you for in court for 10 years. Silas smiled, and it did not reach his eyes. "I get the water. You get a house with servants, dresses that aren't patched with flour sacks, and you get to stay on this land. You get protection. Maeve, people in town talk. They say you are too proud for your own good. They say you are drying up out here, bitter and useless. I can stop that talk. And if I refuse..." Silas's smile vanished. He stepped closer, invading her space. The smell of him was expensive tobacco and bay rum, cloying and thick. "Then nature takes its course," Silas said. "Winter is coming. It is going to be a hard one. Accidents happen. Wells run dry. Cattle wander off and get lost in the Badlands. And when the year's up, your cousin will sell to me for pennies on the dollar just to be rid of the headache." He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. Maeve recoiled as if he had burned her. "Get off my land," she said, her voice shaking with a rage she could barely suppress. Silas studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Have it your way." "Maeve, but when the snow is drifting over your roof and you are freezing in the dark, remember that I offered you a warm bed." He mounted his horse and rode out without looking back. Maeve stood on the porch until he was nothing but a speck of darkness against the gloom. Her hands were trembling. She clamped them under her armpits and went inside the cold house, slamming the door against the night. 2 weeks later, the first blizzard struck. It came screaming down from the north, a white wall of fury that buried the plains in 4 feet of drift. Maeve spent 3 days trapped in the house, burning her furniture to keep the stove lit because the woodpile was buried. When the wind finally died, she fought her way to the barn to find the roof groaned under the weight of the snow. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of hay and animal breath, but the silence was wrong. Maeve found the newest calf, a little white-faced thing born out of season, lying stiff in the corner. Its mother stood over it, lowing softly. Maeve sank to her knees in the straw. She put her hand on the calf's cold flank. It represented $20 at market come spring. $20 was a fortune. It was the difference between buying seed grain or starving. She did not cry. Tears were a waste of water. She simply sat there in the dim light of the lantern, feeling the crushing weight of her solitude. Silas was right about one thing. She could not do this alone. The sheer physical demand of the ranch was breaking her. She needed a back strong enough to lift beams, hands big enough to hold a plow steady in the rocky soil, and a presence that would keep the wolves, both 4-legged and 2-legged, at bay. But she would not marry Silas Ward. She would burn the ranch to the ground before she let him have it. That night, by the light of a kerosene lamp with a cracked chimney, Maeve wrote the letter. She wrote it 5 times, crumpling the paper and tossing it into the stove until she got the words right. She did not write to the local papers in the territory. She knew the men here. They were either under Silas's thumb Drunks who spent their wages at the card tables? Or men who remembered the humiliation of her wedding day 5 years ago when George Miller had left her standing at the altar in her mother's lace dress because he decided a younger, richer girl from Denver was a better prospect? No, she needed a stranger. She addressed the advertisement to a newspaper in Chicago and another in St. Louis, sending the post via the railroad agent who owed her father a favor. Wanted husband for working ranch in Wyoming territory. Must be strong, sober, and willing to work hard. Land is debt-ridden but fertile. I offer partnership and a home. I do not offer romance. This is a business arrangement to save a homestead. Respond to M. Callahan, Iron Creek, Wyoming territory. It was blunt. It was unwomanly. It was desperate. Weeks dragged by. The winter deepened. Maeve ate cornmeal mush and salted beef that was too tough to chew. She grew thinner, her cheekbones sharpening like knives under her skin. The replies came in a bundle in late January, handed to her by the postmaster, Mr. Abernathy, who looked at her over his spectacles with a mix of pity and curiosity. Mail for you, Maeve, lots of it. Maeve took the bundle without a word, feeling the eyes of the townsfolk on her back. The general store was warm, smelling of coffee and sawdust, but the atmosphere chilled the moment she entered. 2 women by the fabric counter stopped whispering and watched her. "That is her," one whispered, loud enough to be heard. "Advertising for a man like she is ordering a plow. Desperate," the other agreed. "Who would take her? She is hard as flint." Maeve walked out, her spine rigid. She waited until she was back at the ranch. The door bolted before she opened the letters. Most were trash. One was from a man who claimed to be a poet seeking a muse. Another was barely literate, scrawled in pencil, asking if she had a fortune hidden under the floorboards. Several were cruel jokes, likely written by local boys who had heard rumors, asking if she came with a paper bag to put over her head. Maeve read them with a stone face, feeding them one by one to the fire. Then she opened an envelope made of cheap, rough paper. The handwriting inside was precise, slanted, and cramped, as if the writer was trying to save ink. "Dear Miss Callahan, I saw your notice in the Chicago Tribune. My name is Lucas Bauer. I am 32 years old. I am strong and I do not drink spirits. I am currently employed laying track for the rail line, but the work is ending. I have no family. I have no property. I have 2 hands and I know how to work until the job is done. I do not ask for romance. I ask for a place to belong and work that means something. I have made mistakes in my life and I carry scars, but I am an honest man who seeks a quiet life. If you will have me, I will come. I promise I will never raise a hand to you in cruelty. Respectfully." Lucas Bauer. Maeve read it twice, then a third time. Lucas Bauer. A German name. The handwriting was that of an educated man, but he was working as a laborer. "I have made mistakes." That line gave her pause. Was he a criminal, a thief on the run? But there was something in the tone, the humility of it. "I promise I will never raise a hand to you." She looked at the other letters, boastful, demanding, or mocking. This man asked for nothing but a place to belong, and he was a foreigner. That meant he had no ties to Iron Creek. He wouldn't know the gossip. He wouldn't know about George Miller or Silas Ward. He would belong to the land, and to her. It was a risk. It was madness. Maeve went to the heavy Bible on the mantel, opened the hollowed-out section in the back, and took out the small roll of bills she had been saving for seed corn. It was everything she had. She wrote back the next morning, "Come. Enclosed is money for a ticket to Iron Creek." The day Lucas Bauer arrived, the sky was the color of a bruised plum. The wind was blowing 30 miles an hour, whipping the steam from the locomotive engine into frantic white ribbons as the train screeched into the Iron Creek station. Maeve stood on the platform. She had worn her best dress, a navy blue wool that was 5 years old and slightly tight across the bust, and she had tried to pin her hair up softer, but the wind had already torn loose several strands that whipped across her face. She felt sick. Her stomach churned with a mixture of terror and shame. She was buying a husband. She was standing here like a cattle buyer at an auction, waiting for her livestock to be unloaded. The platform was crowded. Too crowded for a Tuesday. Word had gotten out. The postmaster talked. The station agent talked. The whole town knew that Maeve Callahan's mail-order man was coming in on the 3 o'clock westbound. They were there to see the freak show. Men leaned against the station wall, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. Women peered from under their bonnets. Silas Ward was there, too. He stood near the ticket booth, smoking a cigar, his eyes fixed on Maeve with amused contempt. The train hissed to a halt. The conductor stepped down. Placing a stool in the dirt, passengers disembarked. A salesman with a sample case, a family reuniting with a grandmother, 2 cowboys looking for work. Then, a man stepped out of the third car. Maeve's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked for the man she had imagined, someone big, perhaps rough-looking, a man who could stare down Silas Ward. The man who stepped onto the platform was not big. He was of average height, perhaps 5'9", and painfully thin. His clothes were clean but threadbare, a dark coat that had been patched at the elbows, trousers that were slightly too short, revealing worn work boots. He wore a flat-brimmed hat that he removed immediately, clutching it to his chest with both hands. He had a small, battered trunk at his feet. He looked around the platform, his eyes wide. They were a pale, watery blue, set deep in a gaunt face with high cheekbones and a sharp jaw. He looked hungry, not just for food, but for safety. He looked like a beaten dog waiting for the next kick. Maeve felt a physical blow of disappointment. This was him, this starved-looking shadow of a man. He couldn't lift a support beam. He couldn't fight Silas. He looked like the wind would blow him over. The crowd murmured. A ripple of laughter moved through the men. "That is him?" someone said loudly. "Looks like he needs a good meal more than a wife." Lucas Bauer heard it. He did not look up. He scanned the faces until he found Maeve. He hesitated, then walked toward her. His gait was stiff, as if his body hurt. "Miss Callahan?" he asked. His voice was soft, barely audible over the hissing steam. The accent was thick, clipping the edges of the words, "German." Maeve nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "I am Lucas," he said. He did not offer his hand. He just stood there, waiting to be judged. Someone in the crowd, a ranch hand named Roy, who worked for Silas, cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hey, Maeve, you pay by the pound? I think you got short-changed." Laughter erupted. Sharp, cruel laughter that peeled the skin off Maeve's pride. Another voice joined in. Maybe she likes them quiet, easier to boss around, or maybe she just needed a stud. And this was the only one cheap enough. Maeve's face burned hot. She shot a look of pure venom at the crowd, but they were enjoying the spectacle too much to care. She looked at Lucas. "Do something," she thought desperately. "Say something. Tell them to go to hell." Lucas did not move. He did not look at the hecklers. He stared at the planks of the platform. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. His knuckles were white where he gripped his hat. He took the insults in silence, absorbing them like a stone absorbs rain. Coward, Maeve thought, the word bitter in her mind. He is a coward. "Let us go," Maeve said, her voice harsh. Lucas nodded once. He picked up his trunk. It looked light, as if there was almost nothing inside. Maeve turned and marched toward her wagon, not waiting for him. Lucas followed a few paces behind, head down, passing through the gauntlet of jeering townsfolk. Silas Ward watched them pass, blowing a stream of smoke into the air. He caught Maeve's eye and tipped his hat, his smile saying everything that needed to be said. "This is your protector? Good luck." They reached the wagon. Maeve climbed up, gathering the reins. Lucas lifted his trunk into the bed and climbed onto the seat beside her. He sat carefully, leaving 6 inches of space between them. Maeve snapped the reins, and the horses lurched forward. They drove out of town, leaving the laughter behind. But the shame rode with them, heavy and suffocating. The drive to the homestead took 2 hours. The wind was merciless, cutting through their coats. The landscape was an endless expanse of sagebrush and gray earth, stretching out to the snow-capped peaks that looked like jagged bone against the sky. For the first mile, Neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon wheels and the wind whistling in their ears. Finally, Maeve could not stand it. "You are thinner than you sounded in your letter," she said, not looking at him. Lucas flinched slightly. "Food was scarce on the line. Miss Callahan, I am strong. I can work." "It is Mrs. Callahan," she corrected automatically, then bit her tongue. "No, it wasn't. Not anymore. I mean, the farm is the Callahan place. I am Maeve." "Maeve," he repeated. He tested the name on his tongue. "It is a good name. Where are you from? In the old country?" "Bavaria," he said. "A village near the mountains. It looked a little like this, but greener." "Why did you leave?" Lucas stared at the horizon. His hands were resting on his knees. Maeve noticed for the first time that his hands were scarred, thick, ropey white lines across the knuckles and the backs of his fingers. They were the hands of a fighter, or a man who had been destroyed by work. "There was nothing for me there," he said simply. "And then, there was nothing for me in the East, either." "Why? What happened in the East?" Lucas turned his head away, pulling his coat collar up. "I worked. I survived. That is all." He was shutting her out. The wall was up. Maeve felt a flash of irritation. She had paid for his ticket. She was offering him half her land. She deserved to know who he was. But she looked at his profile, the sharp nose, the hollow cheek, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon as if expecting an attack, and she stayed silent. She knew what it was like to want to hide your past. They arrived at the homestead at dusk. The house looked small and bleak against the darkening sky. Maeve pulled the wagon up to the barn. "Unload your trunk," she said. "I will unhitch the team. I can do it," Lucas said. He hopped down, landing lightly. "Show me where the feed is. I will tend the horses." Maeve hesitated, then nodded. She watched him work. He was efficient. He moved with a quiet economy, unbuckling the harness with deft fingers. He checked the horses' hooves, ran his hands over their flanks. He spoke to Buster in a low murmur, words she didn't understand. German, soothing. The old horse leaned his head into Lucas's chest. He wasn't incompetent. At least, they went inside the house. It was cold. Maeve lit the stove, her movements jerky with nerves. She heated up the leftover stew from the night before, mostly potatoes and onions, with a scrap of beef. They sat at the small wooden table. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. Maeve watched him eat. He ate with precision, cleaning his plate but eating slowly, as if forcing himself not to wolf it down. "You said you have scars," Maeve said suddenly. "In your letter." Lucas paused, his spoon halfway to his mouth. He lowered it slowly. "Yes, from the railroad? Some. And the others?" Lucas looked at her. His eyes were incredibly sad. "From life." "Maeve," he stood up, taking his plate to the basin. "Where shall I sleep?" Maeve felt a flush of heat rise up her neck. The house had 2 bedrooms. One was hers. The other was filled with storage, broken tack, old crates. "We are not married yet," she said quickly. "The circuit judge comes through on Thursday. Until then, I will sleep in the barn," Lucas said. He seemed relieved. "It is cold in the barn," Maeve said. "I can clear out the back room." "No," Lucas interrupted gently. "The barn is fine. I have slept in worse. It is better. Proper." He picked up his trunk. "Thank you for the meal. Maeve, good night." He walked out the back door, closing it softly behind him. Maeve locked the door. She checked the window latches. Then she blew out the lamp and went to her room. She lay in her bed, buried under 3 quilts, staring up at the dark ceiling. The wind battered the house, demanding entry. She felt a crushing sense of panic. What had she done? She had tied herself to a stranger, a man the town already mocked, a man who wouldn't look people in the eye, a man who seemed broken before he had even started. Silas would eat him alive. She whispered to the empty room. She closed her eyes, trying to sleep, but the wind was too loud. And then, in the lull between gusts, she heard it. Through the thin walls, from the direction of the barn, came a sound, a dry, muffled coughing. It went on for a long time, hacking and painful. as if the person was trying to stifle it in a blanket so no one would hear. Lucas was awake out there in the cold. Maeve pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. She realized, with a sudden, sinking clarity, that he was terrified too. He was a stranger in a land that wanted to kill him, dependent on a woman who looked at him with disappointment, sleeping in the dirt with a revolver she had seen the outline of in his coat pocket. She listened to the coughing until it faded, leaving only the sound of the wind and the beating of her own fearful heart. The office of the Justice of the Peace smelled of stale pipe tobacco, dry paper, and the distinct, sour odor of boredom. Judge Holloway sat behind a desk that was scarred by years of restless penknives, looking at the two people standing before him with an expression that suggested he would rather be anywhere else. It was Thursday. Outside, the wind was rattling the loose sash of the single window, a constant, mournful accompaniment to the proceedings. The room was unheated, the pot-belly stove in the corner standing cold and ash-gray. Maeve Callahan stood straight, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to hide the fact that her knuckles were white. She wore her dark blue dress again, brushed free of the dust from the train station. Her hair pulled back so severely it pulled at her temples. She felt ridiculous. She felt like a fraud. Beside her, Lucas Bauer stood like a man facing a firing squad. He had shaved that morning, his jaw scraped raw in places, and his hair was slicked down with water that had already dried, leaving tufts standing up at the crown. He wore his threadbare coat buttoned to the chin. There were two witnesses, required by territory law. Mrs. Gable, the postmaster's wife, sat on a bench against the wall, her lips pursed so tight they had disappeared. Next to her was Mr. Tinsdale, who owned the dry goods store. They had not come to offer support. They had come to collect currency for the town gossip exchange. Judge Holloway cleared his throat. A wet, rattling sound. "Do you have the ring?" he asked, looking over his spectacles at Lucas. Lucas started. He patted his coat pocket, then the other, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. For a second, panic flared in his pale eyes. He dug into his trousers pocket and produced the ring Maeve had given him 10 minutes before. It was a simple gold band that had belonged to her grandfather, worn thin by 50 years of work. Lucas's hands were shaking, a fine, high-frequency tremor that made the gold catch the weak light filtering through the dust-coated window. He fumbled with it, nearly dropping it on the scarred floorboards. Mrs. Gable let out a soft, audible sniff of derision. Maeve felt a flush of heat climb her neck. It was not shame for herself, but a sudden, sharp spike of anger on Lucas's behalf. He was terrified, and these vultures were feeding on it. She reached out and steadied his hand with her own. Her skin was rough, calloused from the wire fencing, but her grip was firm. Lucas looked at her, startled. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something other than fear. She saw gratitude. "Take my hand," Maeve whispered harshly. "Do not drop it." Lucas nodded. He took a breath that seemed to rattle in his chest. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a loose fit, her hands thinned by the hard winter work. "With this ring," Lucas said, his voice quiet. It was not a boom, but it was not a whisper either. It was low, accented, and surprisingly steady, grounding itself under the tremor of his hands. "I thee wed. I promise to keep and protect you, so long as we both shall live." "Protect her, Mr. Tinsdale muttered under his breath, a sound like dry leaves crunching. "That is a rich one." Maeve turned her head, fixing the shopkeeper with a glare that could have stripped paint. Then she looked back at Lucas. She did not lower her head. She did not murmur her vows like a shamed woman. She spoke them clearly, her voice ringing off the cold plaster walls. "I take you, Lucas, to be my husband, to have and to hold." She said it as a challenge, to have and to hold. Let them laugh. This was her land. This was her life. The judge signed the paper with a scratching quill. "It is done," he said, blowing on the ink. They walked out of the courthouse into the biting wind. The sun was hidden behind a sheet of iron-gray clouds. Maeve felt strange, lighter, yet burdened with a new, terrifying weight. She was a wife. Well, look at this, the happy couple. Silas Ward stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps. He was flanked by two of his ranch hands, leaning casually against a hitching post. He wore a heavy buffalo hide coat that made him look like a bear standing on hind legs. A cigar burned between his gloved fingers. Silas smiled, revealing teeth that looked too white against his weather-beaten face. Congratulations. Maeve, I did not think you would actually go through with it. We are married. Silas, Maeve said, stopping on the top step. The deed is secure. Silas laughed. Secure. That is a word for banks. My dear, not for women who buy drifters off the train. He turned his gaze to Lucas. And you, the mail-order groom, I suppose congratulations are in order for you as well. You found the only woman in the territory desperate enough to take in a stray. Lucas stood perfectly still. His face was a mask of politeness, but Maeve felt him tense beside her. I am not a stray. Mr. Ward, Lucas said softly. I am a husband. Silas took a drag of his cigar and blew the smoke toward them. It whipped up the stairs, stinging Maeve's eyes. You are a purchase, boy, and a poor investment at that. You do not know this land. You do not know what it takes to hold it. Maeve is stubborn. She is determined as a mule, but even a mule breaks if you load it too heavy. He looked back at Maeve. You should have taken my offer. You will find that a cold bed is better than a weak man. Say something, Maeve thought, her fingernails digging into her palms. Hit him, yell at him, do anything. Lucas reached up and touched the brim of his hat. Good day, Mr. Ward, he said. He took Maeve's elbow, his grip gentle but insistent, and guided her down the steps, steering her wide around Silas and his men. Maeve walked with him, but inside, she was seething. The politeness felt like a betrayal. It felt like submission. As they climbed into the wagon, she looked at Lucas's profile. He was looking straight ahead, his jaw set, his eyes empty. He is afraid of them, she thought bitterly. He is just a man who wants to hide. The weeks that followed were a blur of gray skies and breaking backs. They settled into a routine that was defined not by affection, but by the brutal necessities of survival. The Wyoming winter did not care about wedding vows or land deeds. It cared only about finding the weak places in a fence, the cracks in a wall, the gaps in a coat. Lucas rose every morning 2 hours before dawn. Maeve would hear the creak of the back door, then the rhythmic thwack-crack of the axe splitting wood. By the time she came into the kitchen, the stove was lit, the water bucket was full, and Lucas was already gone. Out into the dark to break the ice on the trough for the stock. He worked like a machine. That was the only way Maeve could describe it. He did not move with the loose-limbed swagger of the local cowboys. He moved with the efficient, repetitive drive of a man used to swinging a hammer for 12 hours a day on a railroad line. He fixed the sagging porch that Maeve had been propping up with a log for 2 years. He jacked it up, replaced the rotted beams, and leveled it so true a marble wouldn't roll. He repaired the corrals, replacing the wire she had struggled with, twisting the heavy gauge metal with those scarred, shaking hands until it sang tight in the wind. He did not know cattle. The first time he tried to rope a calf, he tangled himself so badly Maeve had to step in, suppressing a laugh that quickly died when she saw the humiliation burning in his neck. But he learned. He watched her. He listened. Hold the rope higher, she told him one morning, the mud sucking at their boots. Do not use your arm. Use your wrist. Like this, Lucas asked, adjusting his grip. Yes, now throw it. He missed. He missed 10 times. He stayed out there until after dark, throwing the loop at a fence post until he could catch it every time. His silence, however, was a wall she could not climb. He spoke only when necessary. The hay is low. The gray mare has a stone in her shoe. More snow is coming. It irritated her. She was used to being alone. But this was a different kind of loneliness. It was the loneliness of living with a ghost who breathed and ate. She wanted to ask him about Germany. She wanted to ask him about the scars. But every time she looked at him, he was looking at his hands or the horizon. his expression closed and guarded. Yet, there were moments. Small fractures in the ice. One morning, the temperature had dropped to 20 degrees below zero. Maeve came into the kitchen to find Lucas at the basin, trying to wash his hands. He had just come in from clearing the path to the barn. His hands were bright red, the skin cracked and bleeding across the knuckles. He was fumbling with the soap, his fingers too stiff to grip it. "Here," Maeve said. She took the soap from him. She dipped a cloth in the warm water from the reservoir on the side of the stove. "Give me your hands," she commanded. Lucas hesitated, then held them out. They were trembling violently. Maeve took his hands in hers. His skin was rough as sandpaper, freezing cold to the touch. She washed the blood and dirt away gently. The water turned pink in the basin. When she dried them with a towel, her fingers brushed against his wrist, where the pulse beat steady and strong against the thin skin. Lucas stiffened. He drew a sharp breath, his eyes snapping to hers. For a second, they just stood there. The kitchen was silent save for the popping of the wood in the stove. Maeve felt a strange jolt, a current passing between them. It was not quite desire, but it was an acknowledgement. "You are here, I am here, we are flesh and blood." "Thank you," Lucas said, his voice rough. He pulled his hands away quickly, as if he had been burned, and shoved them into his pockets. A few nights later, Maeve sat mending a shirt by the fire. Lucas was working on her father's old rocking chair. One of the rockers had split months ago. Maeve had planned to burn it for kindling. Lucas had found some seasoned oak in the barn. He sat on the floor, whittling a new rocker with a pocket knife. The lamplight cast deep shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the intense furrow of his brow. He looked younger when he was focused, the haunted look momentarily replaced by the concentration of a craftsman. Maeve lowered her needle. She watched his hands, sure, steady, moving with a grace that belied their battered appearance. He fit the new piece into the chair leg, tapping it gently into place. He ran his thumb over the joint, checking for smoothness. He looked up and caught her watching. "It is good wood," he said, sounding almost apologetic. "It seemed a shame to burn it." "My father used to sit in that chair every night," Maeve said. "He would smoke his pipe and tell me about the war." Lucas nodded. He did not ask which war. He looked at the empty chair. "It is ready for you now," he said. He stood up and moved away, fading back into the shadows of the room, leaving the empty chair rocking slightly in the draft. The scars were an accident. Maeve had gone to the barn to check on a ewe that was looking sickly. It was midday, but the barn was dim. She walked quietly on the straw-covered floor. Lucas was in the tack room. He had taken off his shirt and was washing himself with a bucket of water, shivering in the cold air. Maeve stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. His back was a map of violence. Thick, white ridges crisscrossed his skin from his shoulders to his waist. Some were old and faded, others looked newer, pink and angry. There were burn marks, small circular pockmarks on his ribs. And there was a long, jagged line running down his side that looked like it had been made by a knife. It was not the back of a laborer. It was the back of a man who had been tortured. Maeve stepped on a loose board. It creaked. Lucas spun around. His eyes were wide, feral with panic. He grabbed his shirt, clutching it to his chest to cover himself. I am sorry," Maeve stammered, backing away. "I did not know." Lucas stared at her, his chest heaving. The shame in his eyes was so profound it hurt to look at. "Do not look," he whispered. "Please." Maeve turned and fled the barn. She ran back to the house, her heart pounding. What had happened to him? Who had done that? That evening, they ate dinner in a silence that felt brittle enough to snap. "Mr. Abernathy said there is talk of trouble back east again," Maeve said, trying to fill the void. "He said the newspapers are full of it. More strikes." Lucas did not look up from his plate. "Strikes? Riots?" Maeve said. "In Pennsylvania. The railroad workers. They say it was the foreigners who started it. Italians and Germans who did not know their place. They burned a station house." Lucas froze. His fork clattered onto his plate. His face went gray. They say people were killed, Maeve continued, not noticing the change in him at first. Lucas stood up abruptly. His chair scraped loud and harsh against the floorboards. I am not hungry, he said. Lucas? He turned his back to her. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. It is just talk. Maeve, ignorant talk. Is it? Lucas asked. His voice was low, vibrating with something dark. Or is it just what people expect? That we are animals? That we only know how to burn? He walked out into the night, leaving the door swinging in the wind. The storm hit 3 days later. It was not just a blizzard. It was a white hurricane. The wind screamed against the house with a voice like a dying banshee. The temperature dropped so fast the nails in the walls popped with loud cracks like pistol shots. Snow piled up against the windows, sealing them in a tomb of ice. By nightfall, the kitchen was freezing. The stove was burning hot, but the heat was sucked away the moment it left the iron. The bedroom was the only room that held any warmth, located directly behind the chimney. Lucas stood in the doorway of the bedroom, holding a blanket. I will sleep on the floor in here, he said. The barn it is too cold tonight, even for the horses. I brought them into the lower shed, but I cannot stay out there. You will freeze on the floor, Maeve said. The draft comes right under the door. I will be fine. Do not be a fool. Lucas, Maeve snapped. Her teeth were chattering. It is 30 below zero. If you sleep on the floor, you will not wake up. She pointed to the bed. It was a narrow iron frame with a feather mattress. We will share the bed. Lucas looked at the bed, then at her. He looked terrified. Maeve, that is not... We are married. Lucas, it is a piece of furniture. Get in. She blew out the lamp. They lay in the dark. Maeve was against the wall. Lucas on the edge, ready to fall off. They were both fully dressed in their long underwear and wool socks. They lay back to back, a rigid line of separation between them. But the cold was an enemy that forced truces. Slowly, inch by inch, instinct took over. They shifted closer to the center of the mattress. Maeve could feel the heat radiating from him. He was like a furnace, for the first time in months. She stopped shivering. She listened to the wind howling outside, trying to tear the roof off. It sounded like the world was ending. I'm afraid, she whispered. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Lucas did not move. Afraid of the storm? Afraid of all of it, she said into the darkness. I am going to lose this place. Silas is right. I am just a woman holding on to a ghost. My father is dead. The cattle are dying. I am nothing here but a stubborn fool. She felt tears prick her eyes, hot and stinging. The silence stretched. Then, she felt Lucas shift. He did not turn to face her, but he moved closer, his back pressing firmly against hers. A solid wall of warmth. You are not nothing, he said. His voice was a low rumble through the mattress. How do you know? Because I have seen you, he said. I have seen you lift rocks that would break a man. I have seen you walk into the wind without blinking. You are not a ghost. Maeve, this land speaks your name. It knows you. Maeve lay still, the words sinking into her chest. This land speaks your name. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to her. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, she slept without dreaming of falling. The next morning, the world was white. The snow had drifted 6 feet high against the north wall. The sun came out, blinding and cold. They spent the day shoveling. It was back-breaking work. They moved in tandem, Lucas breaking the drifts with the heavy scoop, Maeve clearing the path behind him. They did not speak, but they moved with a rhythm. Lift, throw, step, lift, throw, step. Their breath puffed out in white clouds that mingled in the freezing air. When they finished, they leaned against the barn wall, sweating despite the cold. Lucas looked at her, his face flushed with exertion. He smiled. It was a small, tentative thing, but it transformed his face. Maeve found herself smiling back. We need flour, Maeve said 2 weeks later, and coffee. The roads were passable again. They took the wagon into town. The atmosphere in Iron Creek had soured. The boredom of winter made men mean. Silas Ward had been busy. The rumors were thick in the air like smoke. The German is crazy. He killed a man in Pittsburgh. He is an anarchist. When they walked into the general store, conversation stopped. The silence was heavy and hostile. Mr. Tinsdale weighed their flour without looking them in the eye. Maeve paid, counting out the coins carefully. Lucas carried the sacks out to the wagon. Maeve followed. "Let us go to the saloon," Maeve said. "I need to see Mr. Henderson about the feed bill." Lucas hesitated. "I will wait in the wagon." "No," Maeve said. "You are my husband. You do not wait outside like a dog." She marched toward the silver dollar. Lucas followed, his head down, his hat pulled low. The saloon was warm and smelled of stale beer and unwashed bodies. It was crowded. Men sat at tables, playing cards and nursing whiskey. Maeve walked to the bar. Mr. Henderson was wiping a glass. "I have the payment for last month," she said, placing a few bills on the counter. Henderson nodded, taking the money. "Thanks. Maeve, well, look who it is." The voice came from a table near the stove. It was Roy, the ranch hand who had jeered at the train station. He was drunk. His face was slack and red, his eyes wet and mean. Silas Ward was sitting at a table in the back, nursing a glass of brandy. He watched, his face impassive. Roy stood up, swaying slightly. He walked toward them. "The mail-order bride and her pet Kraut," Roy announced to the room. Lucas stood a few feet behind Maeve. He did not move. He stared at the floor. Roy laughed. "Look at him, shaking in his boots. Hey, boy, you speak English, or do you just grunt?" Lucas said nothing. His jaw was clenched so hard the tendons stood out in his neck. "Let us go," Maeve said quietly. Grabbing Lucas's sleeve, Roy stepped in front of them, blocking the door. "Not so fast. I want to know something. Maeve, how much did he cost? Was he cheaper than a good stud horse? Because I reckon a horse would have more balls." The room erupted in laughter. Maeve felt the familiar burn of humiliation. "Move out of the way. Roy." "Or what?" Roy sneered. "You gonna sick your dog on me? He ain't gonna do nothing. He knows his place, just like you should know yours." Roy leaned in close to Maeve. His breath smelled of rot-gut whiskey and chewing tobacco. "You know, it is a shame," he said, his voice dropping to a rasp. "The Callahan name used to mean something in this valley. Your daddy was a hard man, but now, the Callahan name ain't worth spit. Everyone knows what she is. Just a desperate old maid who had to buy a man because she is too dried up to get one the honest way." The insult hung in the air. "The Callahan name ain't worth spit." Maeve saw Lucas flinch. It was a small movement, like a wire snapping. Lucas's head snapped up. His eyes were no longer pale and watery. They were black holes. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, terrifying vacancy. He remembered. He remembered the foreman in Pennsylvania. He remembered the man spitting on the ground. Bauer. Filth. Your mother was a whore. Lucas moved. It happened so fast that Maeve almost missed it. One moment, Lucas was standing still. The next, he was a blur of motion. He stepped forward, his left hand lashing out to grab Roy by the throat. He didn't just grab him. He slammed him backward. Roy flew through the air. He crashed onto a poker table, scattering chips and glass. Before Roy could even gasp for breath, Lucas was on top of him. He did not swing like a brawler. He struck with the precision of a piston. Thud, thud, thud. Right, left, right. Lucas's fist connected with Roy's nose, shattering it with a wet crunch. Blood sprayed across the sawdust floor. "Say it again," Lucas roared. The voice was unrecognizable. It was a guttural snarl, torn from the bottom of his lungs. "Say her name again." He slammed Roy's head against the floorboards. Roy's eyes rolled back in his head. He was gurgling, trying to raise his hands, but Lucas batted them away like they were feathers. Lucas raised his fist for a killing blow. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He wasn't seeing Roy. He was seeing every man who had ever looked down on him. Every man who had ever made him feel small. Lucas. Maeve's scream cut through the red haze. She threw herself at him. She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into the blood-slicked knuckles. "Lucas, stop! You are killing him!" Lucas froze. His fist hovered inches from Roy's ruined face. He stayed there for a heartbeat, vibrating with tension, his chest heaving like a bellows. He looked up. He saw Maeve. Her eyes were wide with terror. The rage drained out of him as quickly as it had come, leaving him hollow and shaking. He scrambled off Roy, backing away until he hit the bar. He looked at his hands. They were covered in blood. Roy's blood. Roy groaned on the floor, rolling onto his side, spitting teeth. The saloon was dead silent. Every man in the room was staring at Lucas with open-mouthed shock. The quiet husband had just destroyed the biggest brawler in town in 10 seconds flat. Silas Ward sat in the back, his brandy glass halfway to his mouth. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was watching Lucas with a calculating, predatory intensity. The sheriff, a man named Miller who owed Silas too much money, stepped forward. He looked at Roy, then at Lucas. "All right, that is enough," Miller barked, though his voice wavered slightly. "Get him out of here. Maeve, before I lock him up for attempted murder." He glared at Lucas. "I am watching you, boy. One more step out of line, and you will swing." Lucas did not answer. He was trembling violently now. He couldn't stop staring at the blood on his hands. Maeve grabbed his arm. "Come on!" She dragged him out of the saloon, past the stunned faces of the townsfolk, out into the cold, clean air. The ride home was a nightmare of silence. Lucas sat hunched on the wagon seat, staring at his knees. He looked smaller than he had before, as if the violence had carved something out of him. Maeve drove the team, her hands shaking on the reins. She kept seeing the look in his eyes. It hadn't been courage. It had been madness. It had been a slaughter. But beneath the fear, there was a fierce, hot coal burning in her chest. He had fought for her. No one had ever fought for her. George Miller had run away. Her father had fought for the land, but never for her name. Lucas had nearly killed a man because he insulted her. It terrified her, and God help her, it thrilled her. They reached the farmhouse. Lucas climbed down and began to unhitch the horses without a word. Maeve waited until he was finished. He turned to walk to the barn. "Lucas," she said. He stopped, but didn't turn around. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was unsteady. For defending me." Lucas turned slowly. His face was pale in the moonlight. A bruise was forming on his cheek where Roy had flailed a hand. He did not speak her name. He spoke my name. I should have ignored it. "No," Lucas said softly. "No man should say your name like that." He looked at her, and for a moment, the wall was down. She saw the pain, the guilt, and the desperate need in his eyes. "Come inside," Maeve said. "Let me clean your hands." They stood in the kitchen. The lamp cast a golden circle of light on the table. Maeve took a wet cloth and wiped the dried blood from his knuckles. The skin was split, but the hands underneath were steady now. She finished cleaning them. She did not let go. She looked up at him. They were standing close. The air between them hummed with the leftover adrenaline, the metallic scent of blood, and the sudden, overwhelming pull of gravity. Maeve took a step closer. She tilted her face up. Her breath hitched. Lucas looked at her mouth. She saw his pupils dilate. He leaned in, his hand lifting to touch her waist. Then he stopped. He squeezed his eyes shut and pulled back, stepping away from her until his back hit the stove. "No," he whispered. Maeve felt cold air rush into the space where he had been. "Why? I will not be like them," Lucas said, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I will not be a man who takes with violence. I will not be that animal in the saloon. Not with you." He wasn't rejecting her. He was protecting her. From himself. But Maeve didn't hear the protection. She heard the rejection. She felt the sting of her own desire being slapped away. She felt like the unwanted spinster the town said she was. "I am not glass. Lucas!" she snapped, her hurt turning instantly to anger. "I do not need you to treat me like I am fragile. I need a husband, not a martyr." She threw the bloody rag onto the table. Go to sleep, she spat. She stormed into the bedroom and slammed the door. She lay in the dark, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pressed her hands to her face. She could still feel the ghost of his touch on her waist. In the other room, she heard Lucas sit down in her father's chair. She heard the wood groan. And then, silence. She lay awake for hours, replaying the scene in the saloon, the way he had moved, the terrible efficiency of his rage, and the way his hands had shaken afterward. He was dangerous. She knew that now. But as she drifted into a restless sleep, she realized the most terrifying thing of all. She wanted him to touch her with those dangerous hands. Spring arrived in the Wyoming Territory, not with a gentle awakening, but with a violent convulsion. The snow, which had buried the plains in a suffocating white silence for months, began to rot under a gray, weeping sky. The temperature swung wildly. One day the sun would blaze hot enough to burn skin, and the next the wind would scream down from the north, freezing the meltwater into treacherous sheets of black ice. Iron Creek, usually a trickling vein of water, swelled into a brown, churning muscular river that ate away at the banks and threatened the lower pastures. The mud was the worst of it. It was deep, sucking gumbo that pulled boots off feet and bogged down the strongest horses. It coated everything: the porch, the kitchen floor, the hem of Maeve's skirts, and the skin of her hands were constantly stained with the gray-brown earth. Maeve Callahan and Lucas Bauer fought the season side by side. There was no other choice. The herd had survived the winter thin and ragged, and now the calves were dropping. They were born weak, shivering things that needed to be rubbed dry with burlap and sometimes carried into the warmth of the barn. On a Tuesday morning in late March, a heifer bogged down in the lower sinkhole. Maeve spotted her from the ridge, a dark shape struggling in the mire. She rode down, sliding her horse through the slick grass, shouting for Lucas. He was already there, wading into the mud that reached his thighs, a coil of rope over his shoulder. The heifer was bellowing, her eyes rolling white with panic. She had sunk to her belly and was exhausting herself fighting the suction. Lucas did not hesitate. He threw the rope, not with the grace of a cowboy, but with the practical accuracy of a man used to lashing cargo. The loop settled over the heifer's neck. He looked back at Maeve, his face splattered with mud, his hat pulled low against the sleet that had begun to fall. "Tie off to the saddle horn," he shouted over the wind. "Keep the line taut, but do not pull yet. I have to dig her legs free." Maeve nodded. Maneuvering Buster, the old plow horse she was riding, to keep the tension. She watched Lucas plunge his arms into the freezing muck. He was grimacing, the cold surely biting into his bones, but he worked with a frantic, focused energy. He was digging blindly, fighting the vacuum of the earth. "Now!" Lucas yelled. "Pull! Maeve! Pull!" Maeve spurred Buster. The horse groaned and dug his hooves in. The rope sang tight. Lucas got his shoulder under the heifer's rump, heaving upward with a guttural roar of effort. For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. Then, with a wet, sucking sound, the mud released its hold. The heifer scrambled onto solid ground, shaking and coated in slime. Lucas collapsed onto his knees on the bank, chest heaving. Maeve swung down from the saddle and ran to him. He was shivering violently, his trousers soaked through with freezing water. "You are going to freeze to death," she said, her voice sharp with worry. Lucas looked up. His lips were blue, but his eyes were bright. "We saved her," he said. "That is $12. Maeve felt a sudden, fierce constriction in her chest. He was not counting the money for himself. He was counting it for the ranch. For her. "Come on," she said, grabbing his arm and hauling him up. "Get to the house. I will put the horses up." He did not argue. He walked stiffly toward the house, a solitary figure against the vast, gray horizon. The routine of survival began to wear away the sharp edges between them. The silence in the house, once heavy with awkwardness and suspicion, became a companionable quiet. They fell into a rhythm. Lucas took the heaviest work without being asked. He hauled the water buckets, he chopped the wood. He carried the 50-pound sacks of feed. He did it not with a sense of martyrdom, but with a quiet insistence that allowed Maeve to sit for a moment in the evening, her aching back pressed against the chair he had fixed. Small kindnesses began to accumulate like coins in a jar. One morning, Maeve came out to the porch to find her work boots scraped clean of mud and greased with tallow, sitting neatly by the door. A week later, while mending fences, Lucas tore his shirt on a barb. That night, Maeve sat by the fire and stitched it. She did not just close the tear, she reinforced the seam with double stitching, her needle flashing in the lamplight. When she handed it back to him, their fingers brushed. The shirt was still warm from her hands. Lucas held it for a moment, looking at the stitching, then looked at her. "Thank you," he said. "It is good cloth," Maeve replied, looking away. It would be a waste to let it unravel. They shared jokes, too, or at least, they shared the dry, grim humor of people living on the edge of ruin. They had a mule named Solomon who was possessed of a demonic stubbornness. One afternoon, Solomon refused to cross a puddle that was barely an inch deep. Lucas spent 20 minutes coaxing, pulling, and pushing the beast. Finally, he gave up, walked around to the front of the mule, and bowed deeply, sweeping his hat off in the mud. "After you, Your Highness," Lucas said to the mule in solemn English. Maeve, watching from the porch, let out a laugh. It was a rusty sound, one she hadn't heard from herself in years. Lucas turned to look at her, a slow, shy smile spreading across his face. The sight of it made Maeve's breath catch. He looked different when he smiled. Younger, the haunted look in his eyes receding for a fleeting second. But beneath the domestic rhythm, the town was still waiting for them to fail. Maeve went to church alone on Sundays. Lucas refused to go. "I do not think your God wants to hear from me," he had said once, and she hadn't pressed him. But sitting in the pew, Maeve felt the eyes on her. The church ladies, with their stiff bonnets and stiffer morals, whispered behind their hymnals. "They say he sleeps with a knife under his pillow. Mrs." Gable whispered loud enough for Maeve to hear. "I heard he killed a man in Chicago with his bare hands," another replied. "Snapped like a wild dog, just like he did at the saloon. It is only a matter of time before he turns on her." Maeve gripped her prayer book until the leather creaked. She wanted to turn around and scream at them. She wanted to tell them that the wild dog greased her boots and saved her calves, but she knew it wouldn't matter. To them, Lucas was a story, a monster to scare children with. The children were worse. When Lucas drove the wagon into town for supplies, the local boys would run alongside, throwing stones and shouting slurs. "Go back to where you came from. Fritz, Maeve's husband, is a killer." Lucas never reacted. He sat on the wagon seat, his eyes fixed on the horse's ears, his spine rigid. He absorbed the hatred with a terrifying passivity. It hurt Maeve more than if he had shouted back. It made her realize how used to this he was. Silas Ward was the conductor of this orchestra of hate. He did not shout slurs. He was too rich for that. He used the law and the bank. He rode out to the fence line one afternoon when Maeve was alone. He stayed on his side of the wire, looking impeccable in a new gray coat. "Afternoon. Maeve," he called out pleasantly. "Silas," she acknowledged, not stopping her work. "I saw the sheriff today," Silas said casually. "We were discussing the mortgage note. The bank is getting nervous. Maeve, they hear stories about your husband. Unstable men make for bad risks. My husband is fine." "Silas, is he?" Silas chuckled. "Violence is a habit, my dear. Men like that, they do not know when to stop. One day you will say the wrong thing, or burn the biscuits, and he will show you who he really is. He is a better man than you." "Silas," Maeve said, her voice shaking with anger. Silas's eyes narrowed. "Be careful. Maeve, accidents happen out here. Barns burn down. Wells get poisoned. It would be a shame if you lost everything because you were too proud to admit you made a mistake." He tipped his hat and rode away. Maeve watched him go, a cold knot of fear tightening in her stomach. She wasn't afraid of the bank. She was afraid of the accidents. The rain came back in April, a cold, relentless downpour that turned the world gray. Maeve was on the porch, trying to secure a loose shutter that was banging in the wind. The wood was slick with algae and rain. She stepped up on a crate to reach the latch. The crate shifted in the mud. Maeve cried out as her feet went out from under her. She fell backward, bracing herself for the hard impact of the porch floor. She did not hit the floor. She hit something solid and warm. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, catching her mid-fall and hauling her upright against a hard chest. Lucas had come out of the house just in time. He held her tight, his boots braced against the slick boards. "Careful," he breathed, his voice right in her ear. Maeve gasped, her hands clutching his forearms to steady herself. She could feel the muscle beneath his wet shirt. She turned in his arms to face him. They were pressed together from chest to knee. The rain hammered on the tin roof above them, a deafening roar that isolated them in a small, gray world. Water dripped from Maeve's hair onto Lucas's face. He did not let go. His hands were large and warm on her waist. He was looking down at her, his pale eyes dark and dilated. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. There was no mud, no debt, no Silas Ward. There was only the heat of him, the smell of rain and wet wool and man. Maeve felt a jolt of desire so sharp it frightened her. She realized, with sudden clarity, that she wanted him to kiss her. She wanted him to pull her closer. Lucas's gaze dropped to her lips, then snapped back up to her eyes. His fingers tightened on her waist for a fraction of a second, a tremor running through them. Then, he stepped back. He released her abruptly, as if he had overstepped a boundary. He wiped the rain from his face, looking everywhere but at her. "The wood is slick," he muttered. "I will fix the shutter. Go inside." He turned his back to her and reached for the latch. Maeve stood there for a moment, shivering, her skin cold where he had touched her. She went inside, but the feeling of his hands on her waist burned for hours. She began to watch him. She noticed the way his eyes followed her when she moved around the kitchen. She noticed the way he would freeze if she walked too close to him in the narrow hallway, his body tense as a coiled spring. Was it fear, or was it the same hunger she felt? One evening, after a brutal day of digging irrigation ditches, they sat in the kitchen. The fire was roaring, drying their wet clothes. The windows were fogged with steam, shutting out the dark world. Maeve poured 2 glasses of whiskey. It was cheap stuff, fiery and harsh, but it cut the dust from their throats. She pushed a glass across the table to Lucas. He took it, nodding his thanks. He drank it in one swallow, wincing slightly. They sat in silence for a while, the warmth of the alcohol spreading through their blood. "Why did you never marry before?" Lucas asked suddenly. The question startled her. He never asked personal questions. Maeve swirled the amber liquid in her glass. "I almost did. Once." She told him. She told him about George Miller. She told him about the dress her mother had made, the lace imported from St. Louis. She told him about standing in the church vestibule, waiting for a groom who was already on a train to Denver with a girl who had a banker for a father. She told him about the silence in the church when the priest announced there would be no wedding, the pity in the women's eyes, the way the men looked at her afterward, like she was damaged goods, something broken that couldn't be sold. "I learned something that day," Maeve said, her voice hard. "I learned that promises are just air. Land is real, work is real, you can trust dirt, you cannot trust people." Lucas was watching her, his hands wrapped around his empty glass. His knuckles were white. "They were fools," he said quietly. "To think you were the one who lost something. He was the fool." Maeve looked at him. There was a fierceness in his face that made her heart ache. "And you?" she asked. "You said you made mistakes. You said you had scars." Lucas looked down at the table. He was silent for a long time. Maeve thought he wasn't going to answer. "My parents died when I was young," he said finally. "I came to America when I was 20. I thought it was the land of gold. I found coal mines and railroad tracks." He poured himself another finger of whiskey. His hand shook slightly. "We were in Pennsylvania, laying track. The work was hard, dangerous. Men died every week, crushed by rock, blown up by dynamite. The company did not care. We were just bodies, cheap labor. He paused, staring into the past. We struck. We wanted safer hours, better pay. The company brought in men with clubs and guns. They called us anarchists. They called us rats. His voice dropped lower. There was a foreman, a big man. He hated the Germans especially. He told me my mother must have been a whore to birth a rat like me. He spit on the ground when he said her name. Lucas's fist clenched on the table. The wood creaked. Something broke inside me. Maeve, I did not see a foreman anymore. I saw a monster. I hurt him. Badly. The riot started then. Men were shooting. I ran. I have been running ever since. He looked up at her. His eyes were pleading. I am not a killer, Maeve, but when they insult the people I love, when they spit on the names that are holy to me, I cannot stop the fire. Maeve looked at him. She saw the shame he carried. He thought he was a monster because he refused to let the world dehumanize him. She reached across the table. You defend names like other men defend wallets, she said softly. It was an accusation, but it was also a benediction. In a world where men fought for gold, he fought for dignity. Lucas looked at her hand resting on the table. He reached out, his fingers hovering inches from hers. He wanted to touch her. She could see the trembling desire in his hand. But then he pulled back. He withdrew his hand and placed it in his lap. He did not think he deserved to touch her. He thought his hands were too stained. Maeve's heart broke a little. She wanted to grab his hand and press it to her cheek, but she let him pull away. The distance between them was not physical. It was a wall of his own making. The escalation came 3 days later. Maeve woke before dawn to the sound of wire snapping. It was a sharp, metallic ping that echoed in the still air. She sat up. Lucas was already out of bed. He was pulling on his boots, his movements calm and precise. He grabbed his coat and the shotgun that hung over the door. Stay inside, he said. Lucas, stay inside. Maeve! He went out. Maeve jumped out of bed, threw on her wrapper and boots, and grabbed the rifle from the corner. She was not staying inside. She ran out onto the porch. The sun was just bleeding over the horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange. Down by the creek, 3 men were cutting her fence. They were Silas Ward's men. They had already cut a 10-foot gap, and a dozen of Silas's steers were pushing through onto her grazing land. Lucas was walking toward them. He did not run. He walked with a terrifying, steady pace. He held the shotgun across his body, not aiming it, but ready. Maeve ran to catch up, stopping 20 yards behind him. Get off this land, Lucas called out. His voice was not loud, but it carried perfectly in the morning air. The men looked up. It was the foreman, a man named Dutch, and 2 others. They laughed. Or what? Pilgrim, Dutch sneered, holding the wire cutters. You gonna cry to your wife? Lucas stopped 10 feet from them. He jacked a shell into the chamber of the shotgun. The sound was deafeningly loud. I will not ask twice, Lucas said. Take the cattle and go. Dutch dropped the cutters and put his hand on his holstered pistol. You point that thing at me, boy. You better be ready to use it. Lucas looked at him. His face was completely blank. It was the face he had worn in the saloon, the face of a man who had already accepted the outcome. I am ready, Lucas said. He raised the shotgun. He didn't aim at the sky. He aimed directly at Dutch's chest. There was no wavering, no shaking. He stood like a statue carved from ice. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Dutch looked into Lucas's eyes and saw something that made his blood run cold. He saw that Lucas Bauer did not care if he lived or died, as long as he took Dutch with him. Dutch's hand hovered over his gun. He looked at the shotgun. He looked at Lucas's dead eyes. He took his hand away from his gun. You are a crazy son of a bitch, Dutch muttered. He signaled to the other men. Get the cows. Let us go. They herded the steers back through the gap. Dutch swung into his saddle. This isn't over. German, he spat. Silas will not like this. Lucas did not lower the gun until they were over the ridge. Maeve stood there, her rifle forgotten in her hand. She was trembling. She was terrified of him. She had just watched her husband prepare to kill a man over a fence line, But beneath the fear, there was a heat spreading through her belly that had nothing to do with the son. He was dangerous, he was lethal, and he was hers. That night, the adrenaline crashed. They had spent the day repairing the fence, watching the horizon for a counterattack that didn't come. Maeve went into the barn to feed the horses. She climbed the ladder to the hayloft to throw down a bale. She sat down on the bale, and suddenly, she couldn't move. The weight of it all, the debt, Silas, the men with guns, the look in Lucas's eyes. It crushed her. She put her face in her hands and began to sob. It was ugly, jagged weeping, the sound of a woman who had been strong for too long. She heard footsteps on the ladder. Lucas appeared. He saw her sitting there, shaking with grief. He crossed the loft in 3 strides. He did not ask what was wrong. He knelt in the straw in front of her. "Maeve," he whispered. She looked at him, tears streaking the dust on her face. "I cannot do this," she choked out. "They are going to kill you. Lucas, they are going to take the land and they are going to kill you and I will be alone again." Lucas reached out and pulled her into his arms. He held her tight against his chest. One hand cradled the back of her head, pressing her face into the rough wool of his coat. "Shh," he soothed. "I am here. I am not going anywhere." Maeve clung to him. She could hear his heart beating steady and strong beneath the coat. She breathed in the smell of him, sweat, hay, and the gun oil he used to clean the shotgun. Her sobbing slowly subsided, replaced by the rhythm of their breathing. She pulled back slightly to look at him. His face was inches from hers. His eyes were full of a tenderness that stopped her heart. He reached up and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. His hand was rough, but his touch was agonizingly gentle. The air in the loft changed. The fear evaporated, replaced by a sudden, desperate hunger. Maeve looked at his mouth. She didn't think, she just moved. She lifted her face and pressed her lips to his. Lucas froze for a split second. Then he groaned, a low, wounded sound in his throat. He kissed her back. It was not a gentle kiss. It was rough. It tasted of salt and dust and desperation. It was the kiss of 2 people who had been starving for a lifetime. Lucas's arms tightened around her, pulling her so close she couldn't tell where she ended, and he began. Maeve's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him down. They collapsed backward onto the hay, limbs tangling. They pressed against the barn wall, straw crunching under their boots. Lucas's mouth moved to her neck, his breath hot on her skin. Maeve arched into him, a whimper escaping her throat. She wanted him. She wanted to forget the fear and the cold and the debt. She wanted to be consumed. Lucas's hand moved to the buttons of her bodice. His fingers were trembling. Then he stopped. He pulled his head back, gasping for air. He looked down at her. Her hair was wild, her lips swollen, her eyes wide and hazy with desire. He looked at the straw. He looked at the barn roof. No, he gasped. He pushed himself up, scrambling away from her until he was sitting against the opposite wall. He ran a hand through his hair, his chest heaving. "Not here," he said, his voice ragged. "Not like this, not in the dirt like animals because we are afraid." Maeve sat up, confused and aching. "Lucas, you deserve better." "Maeve," he said, looking at her with a fierce intensity, "I will not take you in a barn because we think we are going to die tomorrow. When, if we do this, it will be because we are safe, because it is right, not because of fear." He stood up, offering her a hand. "Come, let us go inside." Maeve took his hand. She felt a flash of frustration. Her body was still humming, but it was drowned out by a wave of respect so deep it made her knees weak. He respected her too much to use her for comfort. The reprieve lasted 3 days. On Saturday morning, the sheriff rode into the yard. He was not alone. Silas Ward was with him, along with 3 deputies. Maeve and Lucas came out to the porch. Lucas did not bring the shotgun, but he stood with his hands free at his sides. "Sheriff Brady," Maeve said, "what is this?" "We found a body." "Maeve," the sheriff said. His face was grim. "One of my men," Silas said. "Young kid named Jimmy. Found him shot in the back down by the creek bed, not 2 miles from here. Maeve felt the blood drain from her face. "Jimmy, shot in the back," the sheriff repeated. "Coward's work." Silas looked at Lucas. "We had some trouble with your husband a few days ago, didn't we, Maeve? Dutch said he pulled a gun on them. Threatened to kill them all." Lucas stood silent. He looked at the sheriff. "I did not shoot anyone," Lucas said calmly. "Didn't you?" Silas sneered. "We know about you, Bauer. We know about Pennsylvania. We know you like to riot. We know you have killed before." The sheriff stepped down from his horse. "We have to take you in for questioning. Son, people are talking. They say you are dangerous. And now a boy is dead." "I was here," Lucas said. "I was with my wife." "Can she prove it?" Silas asked. "Can you prove he was in bed with you all night, Maeve? Or was he out patrolling the property?" Maeve opened her mouth, but the doubt, the tiny, treacherous doubt, flickered in her mind. Lucas had been up early that morning. He often wandered the property at night when he couldn't sleep. Maeve started. The hesitation was enough. Silas smiled. "Bring him in." "Sheriff." Lucas looked at Maeve. He saw the hesitation. He saw the doubt in her eyes. It hit him harder than a bullet. He did not resist. He let the deputies take his arms. He let them tie his wrists. "I did not do this." "Maeve," he said. His voice was flat. "Dead. They hauled him onto a spare horse. I will come to town," Maeve cried, running to the edge of the porch. "I will talk to the judge." Silas tipped his hat to her. "You do that, Maeve, but I think the judge is going to be very interested in your husband's past." They rode away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air. Maeve stood alone on the porch. The silence of the ranch rushed back in, deafening and terrible. That night, the house was empty. Maeve lay in the bed, their bed, staring into the darkness. The pillow beside her still smelled of him. It smelled of wood smoke and soap. She turned onto her side, curling her hand into the empty sheet where he should be. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But the town's whispers were loud in her head. Wild dog, killer, snapped. She remembered the saloon, the way he had smashed Roy's face into the floor, the terrifying blankness in his eyes when he held the shotgun against Dutch. "I have killed before," he had told her in the kitchen. He had admitted it. He was capable of it. But he had also held her in the barn and refused to take advantage of her fear. He had saved the calf in the freezing mud. He had bowed to a mule. Which man was he? The gentle husband who stitched fences, or the violent stranger who snapped when pushed too far, and if Silas pushed him, if the town pushed him, what would happen then? Maeve lay in the dark, shivering despite the quilts, wondering if the man she was falling in love with was a savior, or a monster who would drag them both down into the blood. The sun had not yet cleared the horizon, but the sky was already bleeding a bruised purple when the riders appeared. They came up the long track from town, a cloud of gray dust billowing behind them like a shroud. Maeve Callahan was at the pump, filling the coffee pot. Lucas Bauer was 10 yards away, tightening the cinch on the plow horse. He stopped his work the moment he heard the hoofbeats. He did not run. He did not reach for the revolver tucked in his belt. He simply stood up, wiped his hands on his trousers, and watched them come. There were 4 of them. Sheriff Miller rode in front, his badge catching the first weak light of dawn. 2 deputies flanked him, men Maeve knew by name but who now refused to meet her eyes. And behind them, sitting high on a black stallion, was Silas Ward. They pulled up in the yard, horses snorting in the chill air. "Sheriff," Maeve said. Her voice was cold, flat. "To what do we owe the honor at this hour?" Miller shifted in his saddle. He looked tired. "I am sorry. Maeve, I am here for your husband." "On what charge?" "Murder," Silas answered. His voice was smooth as oil. Maeve spun to face him. "That is a lie." The sheriff held up a hand. "We have a witness who places a man fitting Lucas's description near the creek where Jimmy was found, and given the altercation the other day, well, we need to bring him in for questioning." Lucas took a step forward. The deputies' hands twitched toward their holsters. "I did not kill that boy," Lucas said. His voice was calm, but Maeve heard the strain in it. "Then you can tell the judge that," Miller said. "Get the cuffs." "Boys, no!" Maeve screamed. She moved to intercept them, but Lucas caught her eye. He shook his head. A barely perceptible movement. "Do not, Maeve," he said softly. "Do not fight them." "But Lucas, if I fight, they will shoot," he said. "And you are standing right here." He held his hands out. The wrists were thick, scarred from years of labor. One of the deputies, a young man named Callan who looked terrified, stepped forward and snapped the irons on. The click of the metal echoed off the barn walls like a gunshot. Silas watched with a faint, satisfied smile curling the corner of his mouth. He looked at Lucas like one might look at a wolf caught in a trap. Dangerous, but contained. "I will come with you," Maeve said. "Starting for the wagon." "No," Lucas said sharply. "Stay here. Maeve, tend the stock. Do not come to town until it is settled." He was protecting her, even now, with chains on his wrists. He was trying to keep her away from the ugliness that was about to swallow him. They hauled him up onto a spare horse. He sat awkwardly, his hands bound to the saddle horn. He looked back at Maeve one last time. His pale eyes were wide, communicating a desperate plea. "Trust me." Then they turned and rode away, taking the silence of the morning with them. Maeve stood in the yard, watching the dust settle. The image of Lucas's hands, those capable, scarred hands that had mended her fences and held her while she wept, bound like an animal's, burned itself into her mind with the searing heat of a brand. She went into the house. She did not tend the stock. She went to the mantel, took down the heavy buffalo gun, and checked the load. The jail in Iron Creek was a stone box built into the back of the sheriff's office. It smelled of unwashed bodies, mildew, and despair. Lucas sat on the narrow cot, his head in his hands. They had taken his belt and his boots. He felt small. He felt naked. Sheriff Miller stood on the other side of the bars. He was not a bad man, Lucas thought, but he was a weak one. And in this country, weakness was more dangerous than malice. "Why did you do it, son?" Miller asked. He was peeling an apple with a pocket knife. "Jimmy was just a kid." "I did not do it," Lucas repeated. It was the 100th time he had said it. "I was home. We have people who say otherwise." Miller said, "People who say they saw a foreigner sneaking around Silas's fence line." "Who?" Lucas asked. "Silas's men." Miller didn't answer. He sliced a piece of apple and ate it. "You have a temper. Bauer. We saw it at the saloon. You beat Roy half to death. You pulled a shotgun on Dutch. You are a violent man. I defended my wife." Lucas said, "Is that what they called it in Pennsylvania?" Miller asked. "Defending your wife, or did you just like the blood?" Lucas flinched. The shame washed over him. Hot and prickly. "Men like you," Miller went on, his voice hardening. "You come here with your strange talk and your anger, and you think the rules do not apply. You think you can just snap whenever someone looks at you wrong. Well, this isn't the old country. We have laws. Silas Ward owns your laws," Lucas said quietly. Miller's face darkened. He snapped the knife shut. "You best save your breath for praying. German, because unless you come up with a better story, I cannot stop what is coming." He walked away, the heavy door clanging shut behind him. Lucas was left alone in the dim light, shivering in his stocking feet. Back at the ranch, the wind had picked up. It rattled the windows of the farmhouse. Maeve sat at the kitchen table, the rifle across her knees. She was waiting. She didn't know for what, but she knew Silas wasn't done. He arrived at noon. He came alone this time, driving a buggy. He tied the horse to the rail and walked up the steps, knocking politely on the door frame. Maeve opened the door. She held the rifle loosely in one hand, the barrel pointed at the floorboards. But the threat was clear. Silas removed his hat. He looked pained. A performance for an audience of one. "Maeve," he said, "I wanted to see how you were holding up. Get off my porch. Silas, now." "There is no need for that," he said, stepping into the doorway. "I am trying to help you. The town is in an uproar. People are angry. A boy is dead, and you killed him," Maeve said. Silas sighed, a sound of immense patience. You are upset. You are lashing out. I understand. You have been taken in by a dangerous man. It happens. You were lonely. You made a mistake. He took a step closer. The smell of his cologne, expensive bay rum, made Maeve's stomach turn. I can make this go away. Maeve, how? I have influence. I can get the charges reduced. Manslaughter, perhaps, or self-defense. He would go to prison, yes, but he would live. And you would be free of this burden. And the price? Maeve asked. Silas looked around the yard, at the leaning barn and the dry fields. Sell me the deed, he said. Go back east, or stay. I have a large house. Maeve, I have need of a woman who understands this land. You could be comfortable. You could be safe. Maeve laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. You want me to be your whore? Silas, is that the offer? Silas's face went rigid. The mask slipped, revealing the predator beneath. I am offering you survival. You stubborn bitch. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a hiss. Do you think you can fight me? You are one woman with a failing ranch and a husband who is going to hang before the week is out. You have nothing. I have my name, Maeve said. Your name is Dirt, Silas spat. You are the woman who bought a murderer, and when he swings, you will be nothing but a beggar. You will come to me, Maeve. You will beg me to take this land, and I will make you crawl for it. Maeve raised the rifle. The barrel came up level with his chest. I would rather see this land burn to ash than let you touch 1 acre of it, she said. I would rather die in the dirt. Silas looked at the gun. He saw her finger whitening on the trigger. He stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. Have it your way, he sneered. But do not say I didn't try to save you. He turned and walked to his buggy. As he gathered the reins, he shouted back, Do not wait up for him. Maeve, the town is getting thirsty. Maeve did not wait. She saddled her mare and rode for town. The atmosphere in Iron Creek had changed. It was electric, heavy with a static charge of violence. Men stood in knots on the boardwalks, whispering. When Maeve rode past, they fell silent, watching her with eyes that were hard and unreadable. She went straight to the jail. Sheriff Miller tried to stop her at the desk. You cannot go back there. Maeve, move, Miller, she said, or arrest me. He hesitated, then sighed and tossed her the keys. 5 minutes. Maeve unlocked the cell door. Lucas was sitting on the floor in the corner. He looked up. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut where someone, likely a deputy, had struck him. Lucas. He scrambled to his feet. Maeve, you should not be here. She gripped the bars. His hands covered hers. They were cold. Did they hurt you? She whispered, reaching through to touch his bruised cheek. I am fine, he said, flinching slightly. Maeve, you have to leave. The town, I can hear them through the wall. They are drinking. They are talking about a rope. Let them talk, Maeve said fiercely. The judge is due back on Monday. We just have to wait. Monday is 2 days away. Lucas said, They will not wait. He looked at her, his pale eyes full of a terrible resignation. I wish I had stayed quiet, he whispered. In the saloon, at the fence. Don't say that. It is true. Every time I fight, every time I try to stand up, blood follows. I am cursed. Maeve, I bring it with me. You are not cursed, Maeve said, gripping his fingers so tight it hurt. You are a good man. You are my husband. Lucas leaned his forehead against the cold iron bars. His voice broke. I wanted to be the man who fixed your porch, the man who grew your corn. But I am just the man who kills. Maeve pressed her face to the bars, trying to get closer to him. You are both, she said, and I love both. Lucas went still. He lifted his head, looking at her with wonder and devastation. It was the first time she had said it. Go, he said, pulling his hands away. Please, Maeve, go before it starts. Night fell like a hammer. Maeve did not leave town. She sat in the back of the livery stable, her mare saddled, the rifle across her lap. She waited. At 9 o'clock, the noise began. It started as a low rumble from the direction of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Voices raised in anger, the clatter of glass, then the sound of boots on the boardwalk. A lot of boots. A young barmaid. A girl named Sarah, who Maeve had once helped with a sick mother, came running into the stable. She was breathless, her eyes wide with terror. "Mrs. Bauer! Mrs. Bauer! You have to run." "What is it?" Maeve demanded. Standing up, Silas bought a round for the house. Sarah gasped. He gave a speech. "About protecting our own. About justice. They are coming. Mrs. Bauer. They have rope. They are going to the jail." Maeve didn't run. She mounted her horse and kicked it into a gallop, tearing out of the stable and down the main street. The scene in front of the jail was straight out of hell. 50 men had gathered. Some held torches that cast long, dancing shadows against the brickwork. They were drunk, loud, and dangerous. "Bring him out," someone screamed. "Hang the killer." Silas Ward stood at the back of the crowd, arms crossed, watching his handiwork. Sheriff Miller stood on the steps of the jail, holding a shotgun. "Go home, boys," he shouted, but his voice cracked. "Go home and sleep it off. We want the German. Miller, step aside." Maeve rode her horse straight into the crowd. Men scattered, shouting curses as the mare's hooves kicked up dust. She pulled up right at the steps, leaping from the saddle with a rifle in her hands. She stood next to the sheriff, facing the mob. "Back off," she screamed. "The first man who steps on these stairs gets a bullet." The crowd wavered. They were used to Maeve Callahan, the spinster, the woman who worked a failing farm. They were not used to this fury in a dust-caked coat, eyes burning with lethal intent. "Maeve?" It was Mr. Tinsdale, the shopkeeper. "Go home, girl. This ain't woman's business. It is my business," Maeve yelled. "That is my husband in there, and he is innocent. He is a killer," Roy shouted from the front row. His face was bandaged, his nose a ruin of purple bruising. "He nearly killed me. He should have finished the job," Maeve shouted back. The crowd roared with anger. Someone threw a rock. It struck Maeve on the shoulder, but she didn't flinch. She jacked the lever of the rifle. "I swear to God," she said, her voice dropping to a low, deadly pitch, "I will kill you. I will kill as many of you as I can." For a moment, it was a standoff. The mob pushed forward, the sheer weight of them pressing against the psychological barrier of the gun. Miller was shaking. Maeve was rock steady. Then, a voice boomed out from the darkness. "Enough!" The crowd parted. Judge Holloway walked through. He was an old man, frail and stooped, usually seen napping in his office. But tonight, he wore his black robe over his nightshirt, and he carried a pistol in his hand. "There will be no lynching in my town," Holloway shouted. "You are men, not dogs." He walked up the steps, standing between Maeve and the mob. "Silas Ward," the judge called out. "I see you back there. You want to hang a man without a trial? You will have to shoot me first." The mob hesitated. They feared the judge. He was the one thing in the territory that represented order. In the confusion, someone jostled a man holding a torch. The brand fell, tumbling into a pile of dry crates stacked against the general store next door. The wood caught instantly. Flames licked up the side of the building. "Fire!" someone screamed. Panic rippled through the crowd. The mob mentality fractured as self-preservation kicked in. Men turned to look at the blaze. A gun went off, a nervous twitch from a drunk hand. A man screamed, clutching his leg. One of Silas's hired guns went down. Chaos erupted. The mob scattered, some running to fight the fire, others running to escape the shooting. Holloway turned to Miller. "Get him out, now!" Miller fumbled with the keys. He ran inside. Moments later, he dragged Lucas out. Lucas blinked in the torchlight. He saw the fire, the screaming crowd. He saw Maeve standing with the rifle, her chest heaving. "Go!" Holloway ordered, pointing to the alley behind the jail. "Take the horses, get out of town." "But where?" Miller asked. "Anywhere but here." The judge looked at Lucas. "If you stay, you hang." "Ride!" Maeve grabbed Lucas's arm. "Come on!" They scrambled onto Maeve's mare, Lucas swinging up behind her because his hands were still numb from the cuffs Miller had hastily unlocked. They spurred the horse into the alley. galloping into the darkness just as the roof of the general store collapsed in a shower of sparks. They rode until the horse was blown, lathered with sweat and trembling. They were miles out of town, deep in the foothills where the plains gave way to the jagged, broken teeth of the Badlands. The night was freezing. The stars were hard, bright points of ice above them. They walked the horse to cool him down, moving through a canyon that was little more than a slit in the earth. The wind howled through the rock formations, sounding like lost souls. Maeve was shaking now. The adrenaline had faded, leaving her cold and nauseous. Lucas walked beside her. He reached out and took her hand. "We are alive," he said softly. "For now," Maeve replied. "Silas will send men." "He has to let him send them," Lucas said. "This is not his land. This is the wild." They found shelter in a shallow cave near a trickle of alkali water. It wasn't much, just an overhang of sandstone that blocked the wind. They had no bedroll, no food, only the rifle, the clothes on their backs, and the revolver Miller had returned to Lucas in the confusion. Lucas gathered sagebrush and dried buffalo chips. He made a small fire, shielding it deep in the cave so the light wouldn't carry. They sat huddled together by the weak flame. Maeve's teeth were chattering. Lucas opened his coat. "Come here." Maeve moved into his arms. He wrapped the coat around both of them. They sat pressed together, hip to hip, chest to back. For a long time, they didn't speak. They just breathed, sharing warmth. Then, Maeve turned in his arms. She looked at his face in the firelight. The bruise on his eye was dark and angry. There was a cut on his lip. "You came back," Lucas whispered. "You stood on the steps. You are my husband," she said. He looked at her, and the wall that he had built around himself, the wall of silence, of shame, of fear, crumbled into dust. He saw a woman who had faced down a lynch mob for him. He saw a woman who had chosen him when everyone else had spat on him. He reached up and touched her face. His hand was trembling, but not from fear. "Maeve," he breathed. She kissed him. This time, there was no hesitation, no barn wall to stop them, no fear of the future, because the future was dead. There was only now. The kiss was frantic, hungry. It was a reclaiming. They tore at each other's clothes, desperate for skin-on-skin contact. The cold of the cave vanished, replaced by a searing heat. When they came together, it was not gentle. It was fierce. It was the desperate coupling of two people trying to prove they were still alive. Maeve arched into him, digging her fingers into his scarred back, anchoring herself to the earth. Lucas worshipped her. He kissed every inch of her face, her neck, murmuring her name like a prayer in German and English. He moved with a desperate, terrifying intensity, as if he could drive the memory of the cage and the mob out of his mind with the sheer force of his love for her. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the coat, sweating in the freezing air. Lucas held her so tight his arms shook. He buried his face in her hair. "My heart," he whispered in German. "Mine hurts." Maeve held him, listening to the wind outside. She felt chosen, for the first time in her life. She felt entirely, undeniably chosen. They survived in the Badlands for a week. It was a hard, brutal existence. They ate jackrabbit that Lucas snared with wire from his boot. They drank water that tasted of copper. They slept in shifts, watching the canyon rim for riders. But it was also a time of strange, suspended peace. There was no debt here, no gossip, just the two of them and the indifferent sky. Lucas taught her how to read the signs of the land, skills he had learned from the Navajo laborers on the railroad. He showed her how to find water by watching the birds, how to walk without leaving a track. He was different out here. The hunched, apologetic man was gone. In his place was someone capable, watchful, and deeply protective. On the 8th day, they found the wagon. It was stuck in a dry wash about 10 miles north of their hideout. A wheel had shattered on a rock. A family was stranded there. A man, a woman, and a little girl, no older than 4. They looked terrified when Lucas and Maeve emerged from the rocks. "Dirty and armed. Please," the man said, raising his hands. "We have no money, just food. We are not bandits," Lucas said, holstering his gun. "We can help." Lucas inspected the wheel. He used a sturdy branch and strips of rawhide to lash the spokes together, a temporary fix, but enough to get them to the next town. While he worked, Maeve sat with the woman and the child. The little girl had bright yellow hair and wide, curious eyes. She offered Maeve a piece of dried apple. "What is your name?" Maeve asked. "Clara," the girl said. Maeve smiled. She looked at Lucas working on the wheel, sweating, laughing as he explained something to the father. She imagined, for a dangerous, fleeting moment, a future where they weren't running, a future with a child like Clara. It was nearly dark when the wheel was fixed. "You should camp here," Lucas told the father. "The horses are tired. Move out at first light. We have plenty of beans." The woman said, "Please, share supper with us. It is the least we can do." They sat around the fire. It felt civilized. It felt normal. Clara sat on Lucas's lap, playing with the buttons of his coat. Lucas looked at Maeve over the firelight, his eyes soft. The crack of the rifle shot shattered the world. The father pitched forward into the fire, a hole in his chest. Silas's men, they were on the ridge. Muzzle flashes sparked in the darkness. "Cover!" Lucas screamed. He grabbed Clara and threw her toward her mother, diving for his own gun. Maeve scrambled behind the wagon wheels, bringing the rifle up. She saw shadows moving on the rocks. She fired blindly, trying to suppress them. Lucas was firing back, his revolver barking in the night. "Get down! Stay low!" Bullets chewed up the dirt around them. The horses were screaming, rearing in their traces. Suddenly, one of the horses broke loose. The wagon lurched. "Mama!" Clara screamed. The little girl had been spooked. She ran out from behind the cover of the wagon, trying to reach her mother. "Clara! No!" Lucas yelled. He lunged for her. He left the safety of the wheel, diving into the open to grab the child. He was inches away when the bullet struck. It didn't hit Lucas. It hit Clara. The little girl spun around, a small red blossom exploding on her white dress. She fell into the dirt without a sound. No! The mother's scream tore the night apart. Lucas hit the ground beside the child. He gathered her up, rolling back to cover. "Clara?" he gasped. "Clara?" He pressed his hand to the wound, but the blood pumped through his fingers, dark and fast. The light faded from her eyes in seconds. Lucas stared at the small, limp body in his arms. The noise of the gunfight seemed to fade into a dull roar. He looked at his hands. Blood! Innocent blood! Again, Maeve saw it happen. She saw Lucas break. She stood up, exposing herself to the fire. She levered the rifle and fired with cold precision. She hit a man on the ridge. He screamed and fell. "Go!" she screamed at the darkness. "Get out of here!" The attackers, realizing they had lost the element of surprise and taken a casualty, began to pull back. The gunfire sputtered and died. Silence rushed back into the canyon, broken only by the mother's wailing. Lucas sat in the dirt, still holding the dead child. He was rocking back and forth. "I did this," he whispered. His voice was a broken thing. "I brought them here. They were tracking me." "Lucas," Maeve said, crawling to him. He looked at her. His face was a mask of horror. "Do not touch me," he rasped, flinching away from her hand. "I am cursed. Maeve, everyone I touch dies. The boy in the creek. This child. You—" He stood up, stumbling back, his hands slick with blood. "I have to go. I have to go away from you." He turned toward the darkness of the Badlands. Maeve lunged. She tackled him. She hit him hard, wrapping her arms around his waist and dragging him to the ground. They wrestled in the dust. Lucas fought her, trying to push her away, but she held on with the strength of a drowning woman. "No!" she screamed. "You do not get to run. You do not get to leave me. It is my fault!" Lucas roared, tears finally cutting tracks through the dust on his face. "She is dead because of me." "She is dead because of Silas!" Maeve yelled back, shaking him. "Because of hate! Not because of you! You tried to save her!" She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "Look at me, Lucas! You are not a monster! You are the man who tried to save her!" Lucas collapsed. The fight went out of him. He buried his face in Maeve's neck and howled. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. Maeve held him in the dirt, under the cold stars, while the mother wept over her child a few feet away. She looked out at the dark ridges where Silas's men had fled. Her face hardened into stone. "We are done running," she whispered into Lucas's hair. "We are going back, and God help them." The burial of Clara took place on a wind-swept hill outside the settlement of Pine Ridge, a day's ride from where the ambush had occurred. The ground was hard, resisting the spade, forcing Lucas and the child's father, a broken man named Samuel, to hack at the earth for hours to carve out a resting place small enough for a child yet deep enough to keep the wolves away. Maeve stood with Samuel's wife, Sarah. They did not speak. There were no words for this kind of hollow, scraping grief. Sarah held Clara's doll, a ragged thing made of corn husks and calico, pressing it to her chest as if it could absorb the warmth leaving her own body. When the hole was dug, Lucas climbed out. He was covered in sweat and grave dirt. He did not look at the others. He moved to the wagon, lifted the small bundle wrapped in a quilt, and carried it to the edge of the pit. He held it for a long moment, his head bowed, his knuckles white against the fabric. Maeve watched him and saw his shoulders shaking. He was weeping silently, a deep, internal fracturing that made no sound but tore him apart from the inside. He blamed himself. Maeve knew it as surely as she knew the wind was blowing. He felt the weight of that bullet as if he had pulled the trigger himself. They lowered the child. Samuel read a verse from a battered Bible, his voice cracking and failing until he simply stopped. Lucas took the shovel. He began to fill the grave. He worked with a terrifying, mechanical rhythm, filling the hole until the mound was high and packed tight with stones. When it was done, Lucas fell to his knees beside the stones. He stayed there, head hanging, hands resting in the dirt. Samuel walked over to him. He placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "It was not your bullet, son," Samuel said. His voice was thick with grief, but steady. Lucas did not look up. "I brought them here. The wolves brought themselves." Samuel said, "You tried to save her. I saw you. You left the cover. You tried." Lucas looked up then. His eyes were red-rimmed and haunted. Samuel nodded once, squeezing Lucas's shoulder. "Go. Do not let them find you here." As they rode away from the settlement an hour later, Maeve looked back. Lucas was riding with his spine rigid, staring straight ahead. He looked like a man who was carrying the ghosts of the entire territory on his back. Maeve felt a surge of love for him so fierce it nearly knocked the breath out of her. It was an aching, protective love. He was a violent man, yes, but he carried every death like a personal failure, his conscience a heavy stone he refused to put down. They made camp that night in a dense thicket of aspen, miles from the main road. Lucas was quiet, checking the horses, cleaning the guns. Maeve went to the nearest trading post the next morning, her hat pulled low, posing as a traveler passing through to Montana. She bought coffee, beans, and bullets. She also bought news. She returned to the camp with a face like thunder. Lucas was sitting by the small, smokeless fire whittling a snare trigger. He looked up as she dismounted. "What is it?" he asked. "Silas," Maeve spat. She threw the supplies down. "He has been busy." She paced the small clearing, her boots crunching on the dried leaves. "The story in town is that you killed Jimmy the cowhand in cold blood," Maeve said. "They say you are a madman who snapped. And they say—" She stopped, her jaw clenching. "What do they say about you?" Lucas asked softly. "They say I am a whore who ran off with her husband's murderer," Maeve said, her voice trembling with rage. "They say I abandoned the land in shame. Silas has already petitioned the court to take stewardship of the ranch. He has moved his cattle onto the north pasture. He is absorbing it. Lucas, he is stealing my father's life's work and burying my name in the mud." Lucas stood up. He walked over to her, his movements cautious. "Then we go west," he said. "We go to Oregon or California. We leave the name behind." "No!" Maeve shouted. She spun on him. "I am not running. I ran once, with you, to save your life." "But I will not run so Silas Ward can win." Lucas took her by the shoulders. "Maeve, look at me. If we go back, they will hang me." or I will have to kill them. And if I kill them, I become exactly what they say I am. I do not care what they say," Maeve cried. "I care about the truth." She grabbed the lapels of his coat, pulling him down until their foreheads touched. "He killed that little girl. Lucas, Silas did. His men fired that shot. If we run, we let him get away with it. We let Clara be just another forgotten body in the Badlands. We let him spit on her name, and yours, and mine." Lucas closed his eyes. He breathed in the scent of her, dust and pine and female anger. "What do you want to do?" he whispered. "I want to go back," Maeve said. "I want to clear your name. I want to take back my land. And I want to see Silas Ward in chains." Lucas pulled back. He looked into her eyes and saw the steel there. She was not the tired, defeated woman he had met at the train station. She was iron. "It will be dangerous," he said. "Good," Maeve replied. "I am tired of being safe." The journey back to Iron Creek was slow. They moved like ghosts, sticking to the tree lines and the gullies, avoiding the main roads where Silas's men might be patrolling. They needed proof. Maeve knew that simply riding into town and shouting the truth would get them killed. They needed leverage. Lucas remembered a man, Jakub, he said one night as they huddled over a map drawn in the dirt. "He was a foreman on the crew before I came west. He saw what happened in Pennsylvania. He knows I did not start the riot. He knows I defended my mother's name. Where is he? He is working the spur line near Rock Springs. It is on our way." They found the railroad camp 3 days later. It was a cacophony of sledgehammers ringing on steel, men shouting, and the smell of coal smoke. Lucas went in alone at night, finding Jakub in a tent that smelled of old socks and whiskey. The reunion was tense at first. Jakub thought Lucas was a ghost, but when Lucas explained, the big Pole agreed to help. He was a man who hated injustice almost as much as he hated cold coffee. He promised to come to Iron Creek within the week, bringing a sworn affidavit if need be. Maeve, meanwhile, did her own hunting. She rode into the outskirts of small mining towns, asking careful questions in the saloons. She was looking for loose ends. Silas was a man who discarded people when they were broken. She found one in a shanty outside of a copper mine. Elias, the cowhand who had been with Dutch the day they cut the fence. He was lying on a cot with a leg that had been crushed by a horse and set badly. He was feverish, drunk, and bitter. It cost Maeve her last gold piece and a bottle of good whiskey to get him talking. But talk he did. He spoke of Silas's orders. He spoke of how Dutch had laughed about shooting Jimmy in the back to frame the German. He spoke of the fence cutting. Maeve wrote it all down. She made him sign it, his hand shaking so bad the ink blotted, but the name was legible. With the evidence gathered, they turned their horses toward home. The journey changed them. The desperate fear of the flight faded, replaced by a grim determination. And in the quiet spaces between the danger, something soft began to grow. They camped one night in a high meadow. The air was cold, but the fire was warm. Maeve sat between Lucas's legs, leaning back against his chest. He was brushing her hair. He did it clumsily at first, his large, scarred hands unsure of the long, dark strands. But he learned quickly. The rhythmic pull of the brush was hypnotic. "You have hands like a blacksmith," Maeve teased, tilting her head back to look at him upside down. "But you brush hair like a lady's maid." Lucas smiled. It was a genuine smile. Reaching his eyes, "In the old country, I would have been how do you say it, a poet, or a watchmaker, something quiet." "And instead, you are a cowboy who fights mobs," Maeve said. "I am a husband," Lucas corrected. "That is the only title I want." He put the brush down and wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her neck. "Mina Seal," he whispered against her skin. "What does that mean?" Maeve asked, shivering as his breath hit her ear. "It means my soul," Lucas said. "It means you are the part of me I thought was dead." Maeve turned in his arms. She kissed him. Their lovemaking that night was different. It wasn't the frantic, adrenaline-fueled coupling of the Badlands. It was slow. It was deliberate. They lay under the vast canopy of stars, on a bed of pine boughs and blankets. Lucas took his time. His hands explored her body as if he were memorizing a map. He traced the curve of her hip, the line of her ribs, the scar on her knee from a childhood fall. Maeve touched his scars. She ran her fingers over the ridges on his back, the burns, the bullet graze from the canyon. She kissed them, one by one, claiming them. "You are beautiful," she whispered. "I am a ruin," Lucas murmured, hovering over her. "Then I love ruins," she said, pulling him down. When he entered her, he watched her face. He needed to see her eyes. He needed to know that she was with him, that she wanted this, that she wasn't afraid. Maeve held his gaze, her soul open to him. They moved together in the silence of the wilderness, two broken things fitting together to make something whole, but the fear was never far away. Later, as they lay entangled, Lucas stared up at the sky. "I'm afraid, Maeve," he said quietly. "Of hanging? No, I'm afraid of what I will do when we see him." He tightened his arm around her. "When Silas speaks, when he insults you, the rage comes. It is like a red curtain falling. I cannot see, I cannot think, I just want to tear. You have to control it," Maeve said, resting her hand on his chest over his heart. "If you kill him, we lose. The law will not care why you did it. They will just see a mad dog." "I know," Lucas said, "but I do not know if I can stop it. The last time, I almost didn't stop." Maeve kissed his chest. "You will stop, because I will be there, and you will not leave me alone again." They arrived in Iron Creek under the cover of a moonless night. The town was quiet, sleeping the sleep of the righteous and the guilty. They left their horses in the woods and walked in, avoiding the main street. They went to the judge's house. Judge Holloway opened the door in his nightshirt, holding a candle. When he saw them, he nearly dropped it. "Good God," he hissed, pulling them inside. "Are you trying to get yourselves killed?" "I told you to run. We are done running." "Judge," Maeve said. She laid the affidavit from Elias on his table. Lucas stood by the window, peering through the curtains, his hand on his gun. Holloway read the paper. He rubbed his eyes. This is damning. If Elias testifies..." "He will," Maeve said. "He hates Silas more than he fears him now." "And I have a man coming from the railroad," Lucas added. "He will speak to my character. He will tell the truth about Pennsylvania." The judge sighed, pouring himself a brandy. "This is dangerous. Silas has the sheriff in his pocket. He has hired guns patrolling the street. If you show your face, they might just shoot you on sight. That is why we do it in the open," Maeve said. "Tomorrow, at noon, Silas is holding a town meeting. The judge said he is announcing the annexation of your land. He claims he is doing it for the good of the community." "Perfect," Maeve said. "We will meet him there." "Maeve," the judge warned, "if this goes wrong, I cannot save you. The law is thin out here." "Then we will make it thick," Lucas said. The next day dawned hot and windless. The dust hung in the air like suspended gold. By noon, the area in front of the courthouse was packed. Silas Ward had ensured a crowd. He sat on a chair on the porch, flanked by Dutch, who had survived the fire, and two other hard-eyed gunmen. Sheriff Miller stood to the side, looking uncomfortable. Silas stood up, raising his hands for silence. He looked regal in his fine suit. "Friends," he began, his voice booming, "we have had a hard winter, a tragic winter. We lost a young boy to violence. We saw a neighbor, a woman we all knew, turn her back on decency and flee with a killer." The crowd murmured. Heads nodded. "It is my duty," Silas continued, placing a hand on his chest, "to step in, to ensure that the Callahan land remains productive, to ensure that the stain on our community is washed away." He paused for effect. "I will take stewardship of the deed. I will..." "Liar!" The word cut through the heat like a whip crack. The crowd turned. Maeve Callahan walked down the center of the street. She wore her riding clothes, dust-stained and worn. She held her head high, her eyes fixed on Silas. Behind her walked Lucas. He wore his black coat, his hat pulled low. He did not look at the crowd. He looked only at Silas. Silas froze. His smile faltered, then returned. sharper and colder. "Well, well," he called out. "The prodigal daughter returns." And she brought her pet. Maeve stopped at the foot of the stairs. The crowd parted around them, leaving a wide circle of dust. "I am here for my land." "Silas," Maeve said, her voice steady. "And I am here to clear my husband's name?" Silas laughed. It was a cruel, theatrical sound. "Your husband? You mean the murderer? The coward who shot a boy in the back? He did not kill Jimmy," Maeve shouted. "You did! You ordered it!" The crowd gasped. Silas's face hardened. "Be careful. Maeve, you are hysterical. You have been out in the sun too long." "We have proof," Maeve said. "We have witnesses." Silas waved a hand dismissively. "Witnesses. Drunks and liars, I am sure, just like you." He stepped to the edge of the porch, looking down at her with sneering contempt. "Look at you, Maeve. Look at what you have become. A camp follower. A whore for a foreigner who cannot even speak proper English. You have dragged your name through the mud." He leaned in, his voice carrying to the back of the crowd. "Your father, old Patrick, he must be spinning in his grave right now. To see his daughter turned out like this, to see the Callahan name become a synonym for shame. He should have drowned you at birth. Girl, it would have been a kindness." The insult hung in the air, vibrating. "Your father, spinning in his grave. Shame." Lucas went still. It was the same feeling as the saloon, the same feeling as the riot. A cold, black tunnel opened up in his mind. The sound of the crowd faded. All he could hear was the blood rushing in his ears. All he could see was Silas's sneering mouth. He insulted her name. He insulted her dead father. He spat on her. Lucas snapped. He did not draw his gun. He moved. He exploded up the stairs. He moved so fast that Dutch didn't even have time to reach for his holster. Lucas hit Silas like a freight train. He grabbed Silas by the throat and slammed him backward against the heavy timber post of the porch roof. The impact shook the entire structure. Silas gasped, his eyes bulging. Lucas pinned him there, one hand crushing his windpipe, the other raised in a fist that looked like a hammer of judgment. Lucas's face was twisted into a mask of pure, inhuman fury. His teeth were bared. A growl tore out of his throat, primal and terrifying. "Say it again!" Lucas roared. "Say her name again, and I will tear your tongue out of your head!" The crowd screamed. Guns were drawn. Dutch leveled his pistol at Lucas's back. "Drop him or I shoot!" Dutch yelled. Lucas didn't hear him. He was ready to kill. He was going to crush Silas's throat. He was going to end it. "Lucas!" Maeve was there. She threw herself between Dutch's gun and Lucas's back, ignoring the danger, and grabbed Lucas's arm. She pressed her hands to his chest, right over his heart. "Lucas, look at me." Lucas looked down. His eyes were wild, unseeing. "If you kill him now, they win," Maeve screamed, staring into his madness. "They will hang you. They will write the story and they will say you were a monster. Do not let them win." Lucas trembled. The red haze wavered. He saw Maeve's face. He saw the terror and the love in her eyes. He remembered Clara. He remembered the blood on his hands in the Badlands. "I am cursed," he had said. No, he thought, "I am not cursed. I am a husband." He took a jagged breath. His grip on Silas's throat loosened. He leaned in close to Silas, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You are not worth the rope," he said. He let go. Silas slumped against the post, gasping for air, clutching his throat. Lucas stepped back, his chest heaving, his hands shaking at his sides. He looked at Maeve. He nodded once. I stopped. The crowd was silent. They had seen the violence, but they had also seen the restraint. They had seen a man choose mercy over rage. "Now," Judge Halloway shouted, stepping out from the courthouse doors. He held up the affidavit. "I have a sworn statement here from Elias Thorne. He admits to cutting the fence. He admits that Silas Ward ordered the murder of Jimmy to frame Mr. Bauer." "What?" someone in the crowd shouted. "And I have a witness," the judge yelled. Jacob, the big railroad foreman, stepped out from the crowd. He stood tall, glaring at Silas. "I know this man," Jacob bellowed, pointing at Lucas. "I worked with him. He is no murderer. He defended his family from men like him." He pointed a finger at Silas. The mood of the crowd shifted instantly. It turned like the wind on the plains. They looked at Silas, who was struggling to stand up, his face purple. "It is a lie," Silas rasped. "They are all lying. Sheriff, arrest them!" Sheriff Miller looked at Silas. He looked at the judge. He looked at the crowd, which was now murmuring with anger. Anger directed at Silas. Miller made his choice. He stepped back, folding his arms. "I think we need to hear this out. Silas." Silas looked around. He saw his power crumbling. He saw the way the town was looking at him. He saw Maeve standing tall, her hand in Lucas's. He panicked. He reached inside his coat. He had a hideout gun, a small derringer. He drew it, aiming at Lucas. "He is dead!" Silas screamed. Lucas moved. He didn't snap this time. He reacted. It was the reflex of a man who had lived through riots and wars. He lunged forward, his left hand chopping down on Silas's wrist, his right hand grabbing the gun barrel. He twisted. There was a crack of bone. Bang! The gun went off in the struggle. Lucas grunted, staggering back. A line of red appeared on his upper arm, tearing the black coat, but the bullet hadn't stopped there. Behind Silas, Dutch, who had been raising his own gun, suddenly jerked backward. The bullet, deflected wildly, had struck him in the throat. Dutch fell off the porch, choking on his own blood. Silas screamed as his broken wrist flared with pain. Lucas ripped the gun from his hand and tossed it into the dust. "It is over," Lucas said. He didn't hit Silas again. He didn't need to. Silas fell to his knees, cradling his arm, looking at the dead body of his gunman. The crowd screamed. Women covered their children's eyes. "Doctor!" someone yelled. The town doctor rushed forward to Dutch, but he shook his head after a moment. He was gone. Sheriff Miller stepped up. He pulled his own gun, aiming it at Silas. "Silas Ward, you are under arrest," Miller said, his voice finally finding its strength, "for conspiracy, incitement to violence, and, well, looks like murder again." Miller hauled Silas to his feet. Silas was babbling, threatening, spitting venom, but the spell was broken. He was just a man in a dusty suit with a broken wrist. Maeve ran to Lucas. She ripped his sleeve open. "You are shot," she gasped. Lucas looked at the wound. It was a gouge, bleeding freely, but shallow. "It is just a scratch," he said. He looked at her. His eyes were clear. The shadows were gone. "I didn't kill him," he said. "No," Maeve sobbed, wrapping her arms around his waist and burying her face in his chest. "You didn't. You saved us." The town stood watching. They saw the blood. They saw the dead gunman. But mostly, they saw Maeve Callahan holding tight to her foreign husband, the man they had mocked, the man who had just dismantled a tyrant with his bare hands and then spared his life. Lucas looked over Maeve's head at the crowd. He met their eyes, one by one. He did not look down. He did not hide. Silas was dragged away, screaming that he would buy the judge, buy the governor, buy them all. But his voice faded as the jail door slammed shut. The sun beat down on the street. The dust settled. Maeve pulled back and looked at Lucas. She wiped a smudge of dirt from his cheek. "Let us go home," she said. Lucas nodded. He took her hand. Together, they walked down the center of the street, past the silence, past the judgment, and toward the open prairie where the wind was waiting for them. The back room of Dr. Sterling's office smelled of iodine, stale pipe smoke, and the copper tang of blood. A single kerosene lamp burned on the table, casting long, jittery shadows against the peeling wallpaper. Lucas sat on the edge of the examination table, stripped to the waist. His skin was pale under the grime of the street, slick with sweat. A thick leather strap was clamped between his teeth. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard the wood creaked under the pressure. "Hold him steady." "Maeve," the doctor muttered, threading a curved needle with black silk. Maeve stood by Lucas's good side. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them to be still as she pressed them against his shoulder and chest, anchoring him. "Just a few more," she whispered. "Just a few more. Lucas, look at me. Do not look at the needle." The doctor drove the needle through the jagged tear in Lucas's upper arm. Lucas's head snapped back. A guttural groan trapped behind the leather gag. His muscles seized, hard as iron beneath Maeve's fingers. "I have got you," Maeve murmured, leaning her forehead against his temple, ignoring the sweat and the blood. "I have got you. You are not going to die. I will not let you die after all of this." The doctor tied off the final stitch and snipped the thread with small silver scissors. "There," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "The bullet passed through the muscle. It missed the bone and the artery. He is lucky, or blessed." Lucas spat the leather strap into his hand. He took a ragged, heaving breath. "Not blessed," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "Just hard to kill." Maeve let out a sob that was half laugh, half cry. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the crook of his shoulder. He smelled of gunpowder and fear, but underneath, he was warm and alive. Lucas brought his good hand up to stroke her hair, his touch hesitant, as if he still could not believe he was allowed to hold her. Outside, the town of Iron Creek was vibrating with a strange, nervous energy. The shooting was over, but the echo of it lingered in the dust. Men stood in small knots on the boardwalks, speaking in hushed tones. They looked at the bloodstain on the porch of the courthouse. They looked at the jail where Silas Ward was screaming threats that no one was listening to anymore. The spell was broken. The king was in chains, and the monster they had feared, the quiet German husband, had walked down the middle of the street and spared his life. It did not mean they loved him, but they no longer looked at him as a rabid dog. They looked at him with the wary respect one gives to a man who has walked through fire and come out the other side carrying his wife. The hearing took place 3 days later. It was not a formal trial. The circuit court was weeks away. But Judge Holloway convened a tribunal in the saloon, the only room big enough to hold the crowd. The tables were pushed back. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust and nervous sweat. Silas Ward sat at a small table, his broken wrists splinted and bound in white linen. He was unshaven, his suit dusty, but his arrogance remained untouched. He sneered at the jury, a collection of miners, ranchers, and shopkeepers he had bullied for years. Judge Holloway sat behind the bar, using a bung mallet as a gavel. "We are here to determine the facts," Holloway announced. "This is not a lynching. This is the law." Silas laughed. "The law? I own the law in this territory. Holloway, you are playing a dangerous game. When the governor hears of this—" "The governor is in Cheyenne," Holloway cut in sharply. "And you are here, Silas, charged with conspiracy to commit murder. The witnesses were called. Elias, the cowhand Maeve had found, hobbled in on a crutch." He looked at Silas with pure hatred. He told the room about the orders to cut the fences. He told them about the plan to frame Lucas. He told them how Dutch had laughed after shooting the boy. "Jimmy, in the back." Silas's face turned a mottled purple. He shouted that Elias was a drunk, a liar, a man fired for incompetence. Then came Jakob, the railroad foreman. He was a mountain of a man, filling the room with his presence. He spoke of Pennsylvania. He spoke of the riots. Lucas Bauer is a quiet man. Jakob boomed. He worked hard. He kept his head down. But when the company men came with clubs, when they attacked the women and children in the camp, he fought. He did not start the fire. He tried to put it out. Finally, it was Maeve's turn. She stood in the center of the room. She wore her best dress, the navy blue wool, brushed clean. She looked at the town that had scorned her. She looked at the women who had whispered about her virtue. "Silas Ward told me that I was nothing," she said, her voice ringing clear and cold. "He told me that a woman alone was prey. He threatened to burn me out. He threatened to kill my husband. He told me that my father's name was a joke." She turned to look at Silas. "My father built this town. Silas. He dug the first well. He raised the first barn. And you tried to steal his legacy with the lies and bullets. You called me a whore because I chose a man who works for his bread instead of stealing it." Silas leaned forward. "You are a whore, Maeve. You spread your legs for a stray dog because you were desperate." A gasp went through the room. Lucas stood up. He did not lunge. He did not shout. He walked to the center of the room and stood beside his wife. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of claiming and protection. I am the stray dog, Lucas said. His accent was heavy, but his voice was steady as a heartbeat. He looked at the jury. I admit that I beat the man named Roy in this very room. I admit that I almost killed Mr. Ward on the porch 3 days ago. He paused, looking down at his hands, the hands that had built fences and buried a child in my country and in the East. I was told that I was dirt. I was told that my family name was filth. I was told that because I spoke different, because I was poor. I had no honor. He looked up, meeting the eyes of the men who had wanted to hang him. A man can only take so much of that before he breaks. But I learned something here. I learned that anger is not enough. Anger burns down the house. Love builds the roof. He looked at Maeve. I snapped. Yes, because he insulted the woman who gave me back my name, and I would do it again. But I did not kill him, because she asked me not to, and her voice is stronger than my rage. The room was silent. Even the men who hated foreigners, who thought Lucas was strange and hard, looked at their boots. They understood pride. They understood defending a wife. The verdict was not in doubt. Judge Holloway slammed the mallet down. Silas Ward, you are stripped of your authority in this jurisdiction. Your assets are frozen pending a federal investigation into land fraud and murder. You will be transported to the Territorial Penitentiary to await formal sentencing. Silas screamed. He lunged at the judge, but 2 deputies, men who had once taken his bribes, grabbed him and dragged him toward the door. I will be back, Silas howled. I will burn you all out. No one listened. The door slammed shut. The king was gone. The victory, however, tasted like dust. The judge confirmed the deed to the Callahan Ranch, adding Lucas's name to the title with a flourish of his pen. But a piece of paper could not fix a broken fence or a dry well. 2 days later, Maeve and Lucas rode out to the homestead. It was a ruin. The front door hung on one hinge. The windows were broken, jagged teeth of glass in the frames. The barn roof had partially collapsed where the heavy snows had finally won the war against the rotting beams. The fields were trampled into mud by Silas's cattle. The young corn crushed into the earth. The wind blew through the skeleton of the house, whistling a lonely, mournful tune. They stood in the yard, the silence pressing down on them. Lucas walked to the porch. He touched the railing he had fixed months ago. It was splintered, kicked in by a boot. We should sell, he said quietly. Maeve looked at him. Sell? There is nothing here. Maeve, just work and bad memories. The town, they let you speak, yes, but they still look at me like I am a wolf in the parlor. They will never truly accept us. He turned to face her. We could go to Oregon, where no one knows us. We could start fresh, a new name, a new life. Maeve looked at the ruined house. She saw the years of struggle. She saw her father's ghost sitting in the rocking chair. But she also saw the spot where Lucas had caught her when she slipped in the rain. She saw the barn where they had first kissed. If we leave, Maeve said slowly. Silas wins. Silas is in a cell, Lucas argued. His ghost is not. If we run, we tell the town that he was right, that we were too weak to hold this land, that a woman and a foreigner could not make it work. She walked up the steps and took his hand. My father died on this land. Lucas, I almost died on this land. And I found you on this land. She squeezed his fingers. This is not a ruin. It is a foundation. Lucas looked at her. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes that even the wind could not blow out. He sighed, a long exhalation that carried away the last of his urge to run. It will be hard, he said. We are used to hard, she replied. That night, they camped in the shell of the living room. The stove was cold, the chimney blocked with a bird's nest. They laid their bedroll on the floor in front of the hearth. The wind howled outside, but inside, under the heavy wool blankets, it was warm. They lay facing each other in the dark. Lucas traced the line of Maeve's jaw with his thumb. Are you sure? He whispered. You are not afraid? I'm terrified, Maeve admitted. But I'm more afraid of a life without this place. And without you. Lucas pulled her closer. His body was hard and scarred, a map of all the pain he had survived. But his touch was worshipful. Then we stay, he said. We build. He kissed her. It started slow, a tender exploration of the peace they had fought so hard to win. There was no desperation this time, no glancing at the door to see if gunmen were coming. There was only the slow, deliberate claiming of a husband and a wife. Lucas moved over her, shielding her from the draft, from the world, from the past. Maeve opened to him, wrapping her legs around him, pulling him down into the safety of her body. He whispered to her in German, words of love that needed no translation. He kissed the scars on her hands. He kissed the worry lines on her forehead. He worshipped her with a reverence that made Maeve weep silently in the dark. For the first time, Lucas let go. He let go of the guilt. He let go of the fear of his own strength. He poured all of that intensity, all of that power, into loving her. He drove into her with a rhythm that was not violence, but life. It was a promise. I am here. I am yours. We are alive. When it was over, they lay tangled together, breathless and slick with sweat. The house creaked around them, but it felt different now. It felt occupied. It felt like a home. The next morning, the sun rose clear and bright, burning the frost off the grass. Maeve sat on the edge of the porch, drinking coffee from a tin cup. She felt different. Her body felt heavy, tender, and strange. She counted the days in her head. Then she counted them again. Lucas came around the corner of the house, carrying a hammer he had found in the shed. "We need nails," he said, "and fresh timber for the roof." "Lucas," Maeve said. He stopped. He looked at her face, saw the strange softness in her eyes. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No," she said, "not wrong." She placed a hand on her stomach. It was flat, firm under her dress, but she knew. She knew with the instinct of a woman who had watched the cycles of the earth her whole life. "I think we are going to need more than timber," she said. "We are going to need a cradle." Lucas dropped the hammer. It hit the dirt with a dull thud. He stared at her. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at her stomach, then at her face. "A baby?" he whispered. The word sounded fragile in the air. "I am late," Maeve said. 2 months late, with the running and the fighting. I didn't notice, but I know." Lucas walked up the steps. He moved slowly, as if approaching a wild deer. He knelt in front of her. He reached out a trembling hand and placed it over hers on her belly. "A child," he breathed. "Here? In this place? Here," Maeve said. "A Callahan and a Bauer." Lucas's eyes filled with tears. He pressed his face into her lap, his shoulders shaking. But this time, he was not weeping from grief. He was weeping from a joy so sharp it felt like pain. "We will build a fortress," he vowed, his voice muffled in her skirt. "I will make it safe. I will make it beautiful. No wind will ever touch him." "Or her," Maeve said, stroking his hair. "Or her," Lucas agreed. The rebuilding was not a montage of easy victories. It was a war of inches. They worked from can-see to can't-see. Lucas replaced the roof beams, hauling the timber himself, his muscles straining under the sun. Maeve mixed mud for chinking, planted a late garden, and scrubbed the scorch marks from the floors. The neighbors watched. At first, they stayed away, but slowly, the ice began to thaw. "Mr. Abernathy brought a sack of seed corn. It is late in the season," he grunted, not meeting Lucas's eyes. "But it grows fast." "Thank you," Lucas said, tipping his hat. A week later, the sheriff rode out. He didn't apologize with words. He was not that kind of man, but he brought a borrowed plow horse to replace the one Silas's men had shot. "Use him as long as you need," Miller said. "He is too slow for patrol work anyway." Lucas took the lead rope. He nodded. "We will treat him well. I know you will," Miller said. And then he rode away. It was a truce. It was enough. Maeve taught Lucas the rhythm of the American West. She taught him how to brand without burning too deep, how to read the clouds for hail, how to haggle with the cattle buyers in Cheyenne. Lucas taught Maeve things, too. He taught her how to splice rope the way sailors did. He taught her how to make sauerkraut from the late cabbages, the sour tang filling the kitchen with a smell that felt foreign but tasted like home. and he taught her gentleness. As her belly rounded, swelling like a rising moon under her apron, Lucas became a shadow of protection. He would not let her lift anything heavier than a spoon. He walked behind her, his hands hovering to catch her if she stumbled. In the evenings, they sat on the porch. Lucas would sit on the floor between her legs, his head resting against her knees, his large hand spread over the taut curve of her stomach. He sang to the baby. Low, rumbling songs in German, Guten Abend, Gut Nacht. What does it mean? Maeve asked, running her fingers through his hair, which had grown long and shaggy. It means, good evening. Good night, Lucas murmured. It says the angels are watching. The baby kicked against his hand. Lucas laughed, a sound of pure wonder. He is strong, Lucas said. He has your kick. He has your stubbornness, Maeve countered. The baby came in August, on a night when the sky was torn apart by lightning. A summer storm rolled off the mountains, bringing thunder that shook the house. Maeve went into labor just as the first rain hit the roof. It was too fast. There was no time to fetch the doctor from town. Lucas was terrified. Maeve saw the panic in his eyes as she gripped the iron headboard, riding out a contraction that felt like it was splitting her in two. I do not know how to do this, Lucas cried. Running for hot water. I am not a doctor. You are a farmer, Maeve screamed, gritting her teeth. You have birthed calves. It is the same, only louder. It was not the same. But Lucas did what he always did. He pushed the fear down and did the work. He washed his hands until they were raw. He held Maeve's hand while she crushed his fingers. He wiped the sweat from her face and whispered encouragement in a mix of languages, praying to every god he knew. I cannot, Maeve sobbed, exhausted, her hair plastered to her skull. It hurts too much. You can, Lucas said, his face close to hers. You are Maeve Callahan. You fought a lynch mob. You walked through the Badlands. You can do this. He moved to the foot of the bed. I see the head. Maeve, push, push for him, Maeve screamed, a primal sound that harmonized with the thunder outside. She gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed, and then silence. No, not silence. A cry, a thin, wet, angry wail that cut through the storm. Lucas held up the baby. It was slick with blood and fluids, squirming in the lamplight. It is a boy. Lucas wept, tears streaming down his face. Maeve, it is a boy. He cleaned the child awkwardly, wrapping him in the soft flannel blanket Maeve had sewn. He laid the bundle on Maeve's chest. Maeve looked down. The baby had a tuft of black hair like hers, but when he opened his eyes, they were a pale, piercing blue. Lucas's eyes. He is perfect, she whispered. What do we name him? Lucas asked, kneeling by the bed, resting his head on the mattress. Connor, Maeve said. It was my grandfather's name. Connor. Lucas tested the word. Connor. Lucas Bauer. He reached out a finger. The baby's tiny hand grabbed it, holding on with a grip that was surprisingly strong. Hello, Connor, Lucas whispered. I am your papa, and I promise, no one will ever hurt you. 5 years passed. The Callahan Bauer Ranch was no longer a ruin. It was the finest spread in the valley. The fences were straight and tight. The barn had a new tin roof that gleamed silver in the sun. The herds had doubled, fat on the rich grass that Lucas managed with an obsessive care. The town of Iron Creek had changed, too. The railroad had brought more people, more noise. The memory of Silas Ward had faded into a dark legend, a story told to scare newcomers. People still talked about the Bauers. They pointed them out in church, the tall, quiet man with the faint accent and the woman who walked with a stride that cleared the path before her. Some still whispered, foreigner, troublemaker, but they whispered it quietly, and never when Lucas was looking. Most just nodded. They bought Lucas's beef. They asked Maeve for advice on late frosts. They accepted that this family, forged in fire, was here to stay. On a warm evening in late September, Maeve and Lucas sat on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in bands of violent orange and bruising purple. The wind had died down to a gentle breeze that smelled of sage and cooling earth. Inside the house, 5-year-old Connor was asleep, worn out from a day of chasing chickens and trying to ride the old plow horse. Lucas sat on the step, whittling a toy boat. Maeve sat in the rocker, her father's chair, mending a sock. Lucas stopped whittling. He looked out at the horizon. "I heard a man in town today," he said quietly. "Oh?" Maeve asked, not looking up. "A new miner. He was drunk. He called Mr. Tinsdale a name, a slur." Maeve stopped sewing. She looked at Lucas's back. The muscles were tense. "And?" Lucas turned the wood in his hands. "I felt it. Maeve, the heat, the red curtain. It is still there. It never goes away entirely. I wanted to step in." "Did you?" "No, I walked away. I came home." He looked up at her. His face was lined now, weathered by the sun, but his eyes were clear. "I used to think I was broken because of the anger," he said. "I thought it made me a monster." Maeve put the sock down. She moved from the chair to sit beside him on the step. She took his hand, running her thumb over the scarred knuckles that had once beaten a man half to death to defend her honor. "You are not a monster," she said. "I know," Lucas said. "I know that now. The anger. It is just the lock on the door. It is the wall around the garden. It is there to keep the wolves out. But I do not have to open the door unless I choose to." He looked at the house, where their son was sleeping. "I have something stronger than the rage now," he said. "I have the reason to hold it back." Maeve rested her head on his shoulder. She thought of the train station, the disappointment she had felt when she saw the thin, quiet man. She thought of the lynch mob. She thought of the way he had held Silas's life in his hands and let it go. "You snapped for me," she whispered. Lucas turned to look at her. "I terrified you." Maeve shook her head. She took his hand and pressed it over her heart, feeling the steady rhythm of her own life beating against his palm. "No," she said. "You saved me. When you fought for me. When you shouted my name. It was the first time in my life I felt like I was worth fighting for." Lucas's eyes softened. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "You are worth burning the world for," he whispered. He kissed her. It was a slow, lingering kiss, tasting of coffee and dust and a love that had survived the wilderness. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the world in a twilight hush. The wind blew across the plains, rustling the corn, singing through the wires. But on the porch of the ranch that love had built, there was only peace. Two scarred souls, holding onto each other in the dark. Finally, and completely, home. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a long journey from the cold winds of the train station to the warmth of the porch at sunset. I hope Maeve and Lucas's story has touched something in you. The belief that even in the harshest lands, love can take root if you are stubborn enough to water it. I would love to know where you are listening from. Are you in the American West, the cities of Europe, or somewhere far across the ocean? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the story. Did Lucas make the right choice on the porch? Would you have stayed on the ranch? If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories of grit, romance, and survival on the frontier. Until next time, keep your fences tight and your powder dry.